The night Miles Hart discovered the platinum credit card in his tenant's wallet, he thought he'd finally caught a break. Maybe she could pay rent early. Then he saw the name embossed in silver. Lena Cade. The same last name as the CEO who'd destroyed his life, buried his wife, and walked away smiling. That red USB drive hidden in her backpack? It contained proof that 17 people, including the woman he loved, had been murdered for profit. And the men in black SUVs pulling up outside his crumbling apartment building weren't coming to talk. They were coming to erase the evidence, the girl, and anyone who stood in their way. If you want to see how a single father and a billionaire's daughter brought down an empire with nothing but truth and a paper crane, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The fluorescent light in the third-floor hallway flickered like it was gasping for air, casting shadows that made the peeling wallpaper look worse than it already was. Miles Hart stood in front of apartment 3C with a roll of packing tape and a piece of printer paper that read, "Room for rent, $400 month, utilities included, clean and quiet tenants only." His hand shook slightly as he pressed the sign against the scratched wooden doorframe, smoothing out the corners even though it didn't matter. Nothing about this building deserved smooth corners. Behind him, the sound of a television blared through Mrs. Chen's door, some game show where people screamed about washing machines. Down the hall, the Johnsons were fighting again, their voices muffled but sharp enough to cut through the thin walls. And somewhere below, someone's baby was crying with the kind of persistence that suggested this had been going on for hours. Miles stepped back and looked at his handwritten sign. The letters were slightly crooked, his handwriting rushed because Sophie had been asking for dinner and he'd been trying to get this done before his shift at the warehouse started at midnight. $400. It wasn't much. It wouldn't fix the mounting pile of medical bills on his kitchen counter, or replace the truck that had finally died last Tuesday, or buy Sophie the winter coat she needed because she'd grown 3 inches since last year. But it was something, and something was more than he'd had in a long time. "Daddy?" He turned to find Sophie standing in their doorway, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3. Her dark hair was tangled. He'd forgotten to brush it this morning, and she was wearing the same purple shirt she'd worn yesterday because he hadn't had time to do laundry. 8 years old, and she was already learning to make do with less. Already learning that life wasn't fair, that sometimes good people got buried under circumstances they never asked for, and that her father was just barely holding things together with duct tape and determination. "What's up, Bug?" Miles forced his voice to sound lighter than he felt. "Are you really going to let a stranger live in Mommy's room?" The question hit him in the chest like a physical blow. He'd been avoiding thinking about it in exactly those terms. Sarah's room. The room where she'd folded laundry while humming off key to whatever song was stuck in her head. The room where she'd painted the walls pale yellow because she said it reminded her of sunshine. The room where she'd gotten weaker and weaker until the ambulance came at 3 in the morning and never brought her back. Miles crouched down so he was eye level with his daughter. "It's just a room now, Sophie, and we need the help." "But what if they're mean or scary?" "Then we'll unrent it," he said, even though he had no idea if that was legally possible. "But we have to try, okay? We have to try." Sophie's lower lip trembled, and Miles pulled her into a hug before she could start crying. He couldn't handle her crying right now, not when he was one bad day away from crying himself. "I made you a snack," he said into her hair. "Crackers and peanut butter. It's on the counter. And Mrs. Chen said she'd check on you while I'm at work tonight, so if you need anything—" "I know, Daddy. Knock 3 times. He kissed the top of her head and stood up, his knees cracking in a way that made him feel older than 34. "I'll be back before you wake up. Remember to brush your teeth." "You didn't brush yours this morning." "That's because I'm a terrible role model. Don't be like me." She giggled, actually giggled, and the sound made everything feel slightly less awful for approximately 5 seconds. Then she went back inside, and Miles was alone in the hallway again, staring at his crooked sign and wondering who the hell would actually want to live here. The answer came 3 days later in the form of a girl who looked like she'd gotten lost on her way to somewhere better. Miles was halfway through his first cup of instant coffee, the cheap kind that tasted like regret, when someone knocked on the door. Not the usual bang, bang, bang of bill collectors or the apologetic tap-tap of neighbors asking to borrow something. This was polite. measured. 3 deliberate knocks that suggested the person on the other side had been raised with manners. He opened the door to find a young woman standing in the hallway with a backpack slung over one shoulder and an expression that was carefully neutral. Early 20s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a plain gray sweater that looked new, and her sneakers were the kind you saw in store windows but never actually on people's feet in this neighborhood. "Hi," she said. "I saw your sign about the room." Miles blinked. He'd put the sign up almost 72 hours ago and had started to assume it was invisible. "Oh, yeah. The room. Is it still available?" Yes, sorry, I just... Hold on." He stepped back, suddenly aware that he was wearing a t-shirt with a coffee stain and sweatpants that had a hole in the knee. "Come in, I'll show you." She stepped inside and Miles watched her take in the apartment with a quick, assessing glance. The sagging couch with duct tape holding one armrest together. The kitchen table that wobbled because one leg was shorter than the others. The stack of unpaid bills he'd shoved behind the coffee maker. The children's drawings taped to the refrigerator. Everything about this place screamed struggling single dad barely keeping his head above water, and he hated that she could see it. "It's not much," he said, which felt like the understatement of the century. "But it's clean, mostly. I try. I have a kid, so there's toys and stuff, but it's fine," she interrupted gently. "Can I see the room?" He led her down the narrow hallway past Sophie's room, door covered in stickers, and the bathroom that desperately needed new tile, stopping at the last door on the right. His hand hesitated on the doorknob for just a second before he pushed it open. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12. There was a twin bed with a bare mattress, a dresser with one drawer that stuck, and a window that overlooked the alley behind the building where someone had abandoned a rusted shopping cart. The yellow paint Sarah had loved looked dingy now, like sunshine that had been left out in the rain too long. $400 a month, Miles said. Utilities included. You'd share the bathroom. My daughter and I keep weird hours because of my work schedule, but we're pretty quiet. There's no smoking in the building and rent's due on the 1st. The girl walked to the window and looked out at the alley. "What do you do for work?" "Night shift at a warehouse, stocking shelves, loading trucks, whatever they need." "And during the day?" He hesitated. He didn't usually tell people about the second job because it felt like admitting defeat. "I fix things. Small repairs, mostly. Leaky faucets, broken cabinets, whatever people in the building need. It's under the table, but it helps." She nodded slowly, still looking out the window. "Do you have a lease or something I need to sign?" "I can write something up. It doesn't have to be fancy, just your name, date you're moving in, agreement to pay rent, that kind of thing." "Okay." She turned to face him, and for the first time he noticed her eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, like storm clouds. "I'll take it." Miles felt a rush of relief so strong it almost made him dizzy. $400 every month. It wasn't going to solve everything, but it would mean he could keep the electricity on and maybe fix the truck and buy Sophie that winter coat. "Great," he said, trying not to sound too desperate. "That's great. When do you want to move in?" "Today?" "Today? You don't need time to—" "I don't have a lot of stuff," she said simply. "And I need a place now. Is that a problem?" "No, no problem. I just need to get you a key cut, and I'll write up that agreement. What's your name?" "Lena." She shifted her backpack. "Lena Cade." Miles felt something catch in his chest at the last name, some vague recognition he couldn't quite place. "Cade? Is that Irish?" "I don't know. Maybe." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm a student at Riverside Community College, nursing program. My schedule's pretty full, so I'll probably be gone a lot. I'm quiet, I clean up after myself, and I can pay first and last month today if that helps." $800? He tried not to let the shock show on his face. "Is that a problem?" "No, most people pay month to month. I like to be prepared." She reached into her backpack and pulled out an envelope. "Cash, okay?" Miles stared at the envelope like it might bite him. Cash. $800 in cash. He'd been living on ramen and hope for so long he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have money in his hand. "Cash is fine," he managed. She handed him the envelope, and he opened it just enough to verify that yes, this was real money and not Monopoly bills. 8 crisp $100 bills, stacked neatly. He'd expected wrinkled 20s, maybe a few 10s. This looked like it had come straight from a bank. Okay, he said slowly. Let me write you a receipt. He led her back to the kitchen and found a pen that actually worked after testing 3 that didn't. On the back of an old electric bill, he wrote, "Received from Lena Cade, $800 for first and last month rent. Room at 3C, date." He paused. "What's today?" "October 15th. He finished writing and signed his name at the bottom, then handed it to her. "There's a locksmith in the next block. I'll get you a key made this afternoon. In the meantime, you can start moving stuff in if you want. I'll be here for another hour before I have to pick up Sophie from school." "Sophie's your daughter?" "Yeah, she's 8. She's a good kid. Quiet, like I said. She might be shy at first, but she'll warm up." Lena nodded, already pulling items out of her backpack. A laptop, a few textbooks, a zippered pouch that looked like it held toiletries. "I'll try not to get in the way." "You're not in the way. You're helping. Really." He meant it. For the first time in months, he felt like maybe he could breathe a little easier. Sophie did not warm up. When Miles introduced her to Lena that evening, his daughter retreated behind his leg and stared at the newcomer with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for vegetables. "Sophie, this is Lena. She's going to be living in the extra room for a while." "Hi, Sophie," Lena said, crouching down to eye level. "It's nice to meet you." Sophie said nothing. "She made a rabbit," Lena continued, nodding toward the stuffed animal clutched in Sophie's arms. "That's a really cool rabbit. What's its name?" "Mr. Hopscotch," Sophie whispered, barely audible. "Mr. Hopscotch is an excellent name." Silence. Miles cleared his throat. "Sophie, remember what we talked about? How having someone else here means we can pay the bills," Sophie finished flatly. "I know." He winced. 8 years old, and she already understood too much about money and struggle. "Go wash up for dinner, Bug. We're having spaghetti." Sophie disappeared down the hallway without another word, and Miles turned to Lena with an apologetic expression. "Sorry, she's been through a lot. Her mom died about a year ago and she's still processing." "You don't need to apologize," Lena said quietly. "I get it." They ate spaghetti at the wobbly kitchen table, Miles, Sophie, and Lena, and the silence was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sophie pushed noodles around her plate and occasionally shot suspicious glances at Lena, who ate methodically and didn't try to force conversation. Miles attempted to fill the quiet with meaningless observations about the weather and traffic, but even he couldn't sustain small talk for an entire meal. After dinner, Lena helped clear the dishes without being asked, rinsing plates and stacking them in the drainer while Sophie did her homework at the table. Miles watched her move through the kitchen like she'd been there for years instead of hours, and something about it felt off in a way he couldn't articulate. Not wrong exactly, just too smooth, too competent, like she was playing a role she'd rehearsed. "Do you need anything for your room?" he asked as she dried the last fork. "Extra blankets or pillows or—" "I'm good. Thanks." "Okay. Well, I'm leaving for work at 11. Sophie knows the routine, but if anything comes up, I'll be here," Lena said. "It's fine." And that was it. She retreated to her room, the door clicking shut behind her, and Miles was left standing in the kitchen wondering why someone who looked like she'd stepped out of a college brochure was living in a rundown apartment with a broke single dad and his traumatized kid. The first week passed in a blur of overlapping schedules and careful avoidance. Miles worked his night shift at the warehouse, came home at dawn, slept until noon, picked up Sophie from school, made dinner, and left for work again. Lena appeared and disappeared like a ghost. Early morning classes, late night study sessions, brief encounters in the kitchen where they exchanged polite nods and nothing more. She paid rent on time. She cleaned up after herself. She didn't complain about the noise or the heat that barely worked or the water pressure that was more suggestion than reality. But there were things, small things, things that didn't add up, like the way she always had cash, not just for rent, but for groceries, for coffee, for the pizza she ordered one night and insisted on sharing with Sophie. Crisp bills that looked too new, too clean, like they'd never been folded in a wallet or shoved in a pocket. Or the laptop she carried everywhere, sleek, silver, expensive. The kind of machine that cost more than Miles made in 2 months. When he'd asked about it, she'd said it was for school, But he'd seen the software running on her screen once when she'd left it open on the kitchen counter. Code. Complex strings of text that looked nothing like nursing homework. And then there was the bracelet. He noticed it on the 13th day. Lena was standing at the stove making scrambled eggs. She'd started cooking breakfast sometimes, which Sophie actually tolerated, and the sleeve of her sweater had ridden up just enough to reveal a delicate silver chain around her wrist. It caught the light as she stirred the eggs, and Miles saw the inscription before he could stop himself from looking. Cade Industries. The name hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. Cade Industries. The corporation that had laid him off 3 years ago when they'd shut down the local manufacturing plant. The corporation that had gutted the town's economy and left hundreds of families scrambling. The corporation whose CEO had stood in front of news cameras and talked about market restructuring and fiduciary responsibility while people lost their homes and their health insurance and their hope. The corporation that had indirectly killed his wife. Miles felt his hands start to shake, and he shoved them in his pockets before Sophie or Lena could notice. He watched Lena plate the eggs, watched her hand a fork to Sophie, watched her smile like everything was normal and fine, and she wasn't wearing a piece of jewelry that connected her to the people who'd destroyed his life. "I have to go," he said abruptly. "Early shift." Lena looked up, surprised. "I thought you weren't working until tonight." "Change of plans. Sophie, I'll pick you up from school at 3. Be good." He grabbed his jacket and keys and got out of the apartment before anyone could ask questions. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and tried to remember how to breathe. Cade Industries. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she'd bought the bracelet at a thrift store. Maybe she didn't even know what it meant. Maybe he was seeing connections that weren't there because he was tired and stressed and looking for someone to blame. Or maybe the girl living in his dead wife's room had ties to the people who'd put Sarah in the ground. He started paying closer attention after that. Not obviously. Not in a way that would make Lena suspicious. But he watched. He listened. He noticed. Like how she always angled her laptop screen away from the door when he walked past. Or how she sometimes received phone calls late at night and stepped out into the hallway to take them, her voice too low to hear. Or how she flinched whenever Sophie asked her questions about her family. "Do you have brothers or sisters?" Sophie had asked one evening while they were folding laundry together. Somehow, Lena had started helping with household chores, and Sophie had slowly started accepting her presence. "No," Lena had said, "it's just me." "What about your parents?" "They're busy." "Doing what?" "Work stuff. Nothing interesting." Sophie had frowned, unsatisfied with the non-answer, but she'd dropped it. Miles hadn't. He started Googling. Late at night, during his breaks at the warehouse, he'd pull up his phone and search Cade Industries CEO and Cade Industries family, and finally, Graham Cade daughter. And there she was. A photo from some charity gala 3 years ago. Graham Cade, silver-haired, sharp-suited, smiling like a predator, standing next to a teenage girl in a formal dress. Dark hair. Gray-green eyes. The caption read, "Billionaire Graham Cade with daughter Lena at the annual Children's Hospital fundraiser." Miles stared at the photo until his phone screen went dark. The girl living in his apartment, the girl who'd paid cash and claimed to be a broke nursing student, was the daughter of the man who'd destroyed his life. His first instinct was to confront her immediately, to drag her out of Sarah's room and demand answers, to throw her out before she could do whatever it was she'd come here to do. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she looked at Sophie sometimes when she thought no one was watching, not calculating or cold, but genuinely gentle. Or the way she'd fixed the wobbly kitchen table without being asked, kneeling on the floor with a screwdriver she'd somehow procured and tightening bolts until it stood steady. Or the way she never asked questions about Sarah, never pushed into spaces that were too painful to talk about. Or maybe it was just that $400 a month was keeping them afloat, and he couldn't afford to lose it yet. So he waited, and he watched, and he tried to figure out what the hell Lena Cade was doing in his home. The answer started to reveal itself in pieces. First piece? The USB drive. Miles found it by accident on a Tuesday afternoon when he was looking for Sophie's math homework in the kitchen. He thought maybe she'd left it on the counter, and instead he'd found Lena's backpack hanging on the back of a chair, partially unzipped. He shouldn't have looked. He knew he shouldn't have looked. But his hand moved before his brain could stop it, and there it was, a small red USB drive tucked into a side pocket, the kind you could buy at any drugstore. Except this one had a label in neat handwriting. Project Raven Lake. Do not disclose. Project Raven Lake. Miles stood in the kitchen holding a USB drive that probably contained corporate secrets, his heart hammering against his ribs. He should put it back. He should pretend he never saw it. He should... His laptop was on the couch. 5 minutes later, he was staring at his screen while files uploaded, his palms sweating and his conscience screaming that this was wrong, this was illegal, this was a massive violation of privacy. But the name of the first folder stopped him cold. Environmental Impact Reports. Suppressed. He clicked. And then he couldn't stop clicking. Reports. Data. Internal memos. All of it detailing a project called Raven Lake, a real estate development scheme that involved Cade Industries purchasing land around a contaminated water source, concealing the contamination from potential buyers, and manipulating property values. There were chemical analysis reports showing toxic levels of industrial runoff. There were emails from Graham Cade himself ordering staff to bury findings. There were population health studies tracking illness rates in surrounding communities. And there, buried in a subfolder labeled Casualties, was a list of names. 17 people who had died from complications related to long-term chemical exposure. Miles scrolled down, his vision tunneling, his hands numb. And there it was. Sarah Hart, age 32, deceased. Cardiac arrest secondary to cardiomyopathy, suspected environmental trigger. His wife's name, in a file detailing corporate murder for profit. The room started to spin. Miles closed the laptop and shoved it away like it had burned him, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps that didn't seem to bring any oxygen. Sarah hadn't just died. She'd been killed. Slowly, over years, by chemicals in the water they'd used to cook and bathe and live, by a corporation that had known and hidden it, by a CEO who'd valued profit over human life, by Lena Cade's father. And Lena had known. She'd had the files. She'd been carrying proof of mass murder in her backpack while living under his roof, sleeping in Sarah's room, eating dinner with the daughter of one of her father's victims. Miles stood up so fast he knocked the chair over. He needed air. He needed to think. He needed to... The door opened. Lena walked in carrying a bag of groceries, and she stopped when she saw his face. "Miles, are you okay?" He couldn't speak, couldn't move. Just stood there with his laptop still warm from displaying files that proved her family had killed his wife. Lena's eyes flicked to the laptop, to the red USB drive sitting next to it on the coffee table, to Miles's expression, and her face went white. "Oh no," she whispered. "You weren't supposed to see that. Get out." "Miles, please, I can explain. Get out of my house." Sophie's door opened down the hallway. "Daddy?" Miles couldn't look away from Lena. "You knew. You've known this whole time. You've been living here with evidence that your father killed my wife, and you didn't say anything." "I was trying to figure out how to tell you," Lena said, her voice shaking. "I was trying to, figure out how to cover it up? How to protect him? No, I was trying to figure out how to expose him. That's why I have the files. That's why I'm here." "Bullshit! It's not bullshit!" Tears were streaming down Lena's face now, but Miles felt nothing. No sympathy, no mercy, just rage. "I found out about Raven Lake 6 months ago. I've been gathering evidence, trying to find proof, trying to build a case, but he's too powerful and too protected. And then I found your name, Sarah's name, in the victim list, and I knew I had to do something. I had to make this right. By lying to me? By pretending to be a broke student? By getting close enough to help you? By making sure the evidence got to someone who could use it? Daddy, what's happening?" Sophie's voice was small and scared, and that finally broke through Miles' fury enough to make him lower his voice. "Sophie, go back to your room, now." "But, now." She disappeared and Miles turned back to Lena. "You have 1 hour to get your stuff and leave. After that, I'm calling the police." "Miles, please listen to me. My father is going to come for these files. He knows I took them. That's why I'm hiding here. If you kick me out, he'll find me, and he'll destroy the evidence. and everyone he hurt will never get justice. That's not my problem, isn't it? Your wife died because of him. Don't you want him to pay? Miles felt something crack inside his chest. What I want is for you to get out of my sight before I do something I regret. Lena stared at him for a long moment, and then she nodded. Okay, I'll go, but I'm leaving the USB drive. You deserve to know the truth. You deserve to decide what happens next. She walked to the coffee table, picked up the red USB drive, and set it down deliberately in front of Miles. Then she turned and went to her room, to Sarah's room, and started gathering her things. Miles stood in the kitchen, staring at the USB drive like it was a live grenade. Truth, justice, evidence, and behind it all, the name of the woman he'd loved, filed away under casualties like she was a statistic instead of a person. He picked up the drive and closed his fist around it. Lena was gone in 45 minutes. She packed everything into her backpack and a duffel bag she'd apparently kept hidden under the bed. She didn't try to talk to Miles again, didn't try to explain or justify or plead. She just moved through the apartment like a ghost, collecting pieces of a life that had never been real to begin with. At the door, she paused and looked back. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For lying. For everything. But I meant what I said. You deserve justice. And Sophie deserves to know that her mother's death wasn't random. It was murder. Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her, and Miles was alone with a USB drive full of evidence and no idea what to do with it. Sophie emerged from her room 30 seconds later. Is Lena coming back? No, Bug, she's not. Why not? It's complicated. Did she do something bad? Miles thought about that. About Lena's tear-streaked face. About the way she'd helped with homework and fixed the wobbly table and folded laundry like she belonged here. About the evidence she'd risked everything to gather. I don't know, he said honestly. I really don't know. Chet. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat on the couch with his laptop open, reading through the files again. Slowly. Carefully. Trying to understand the scope of what he was looking at. Project Raven Lake had started 5 years ago, when Cade Industries had purchased land around a small lake outside the city. The lake had been contaminated by industrial runoff from a chemical plant that had closed in the 1990s, but instead of remediating the site, an expensive, time-consuming process, Cade Industries had simply hidden the contamination reports and started selling properties to middle and lower-income families who couldn't afford environmental inspections. The memos were clinical, detached. Projected mortality acceptable within industry standards. Legal exposure minimal given socioeconomic status of affected population. Cost-benefit analysis favors suppression over disclosure. People had drunk the water, bathed in it, cooked with it, let their children swim in it, and when they'd started getting sick, cancer, heart conditions, neurological problems, Cade Industries had quietly settled individual lawsuits with NDAs attached, ensuring no one could piece together the pattern. 17 confirmed deaths, dozens more suffering long-term health problems, entire families destroyed. And at the center of it all, Graham Cade had signed off on every decision, every cover-up, every calculated risk that human lives were worth less than profit margins. Sarah had moved to one of those properties 4 years ago, before she'd met Miles. She'd rented a small house near the lake because it was cheap and pretty and close to her job at the library. She'd lived there for 2 years before they'd gotten married and moved to the city together. 2 years of contaminated water. 2 years of slow, invisible poisoning. 2 years that had eventually manifested as the heart condition that killed her at 32, while Miles was at work and Sophie was at school, and there was no one there to call for help until it was too late. Miles closed the laptop and pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. He'd thought it was bad luck, genetic predisposition, one of those tragic things that happen sometimes because life wasn't fair. He'd never imagined it was murder, and now he knew. Now he had proof. Now he had the names of the people responsible and the evidence to bury them. But what was he supposed to do with it? He was a warehouse worker with an 8th grade education and a mountain of debt. He didn't know lawyers. He didn't know journalists. He didn't know how to navigate the legal system or how to fight a billion-dollar corporation that could afford to tie him up in court until he died of old age. The smart thing to do was probably to mail the files to the police anonymously and hope someone gave a damn. But the rage burning in his chest wasn't interested in Smart. It wanted blood. It wanted Graham Cade to pay for every day Sarah had suffered, every fear Sophie had lived with, every night Miles had spent wondering if he could have done something differently. He wanted justice. And Lena who'd lied but also risked everything, had given him the weapon to get it. The problem was, he had no idea how to use it without getting himself killed in the process. The next morning, Miles dropped Sophie at school and drove to the address on Lena's rental agreement. It was fake, of course. The building didn't exist. The street number ended 3 blocks before the numbers on the paper. He'd known it would be, but he'd needed to confirm it anyway. So she'd lied about everything. Her name was probably the only true thing she'd given him. He sat in his truck, the one that barely ran and burned oil and needed new brakes, and called the number she'd written down as her emergency contact. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. No greeting, no name, just a beep. "It's Miles Hart," he said. "I know who you are. I know what you gave me. And I need to know if you're serious about taking him down because I can't do this alone." He hung up and drove back to the apartment, half expecting to find men in suits waiting for him. Instead, he found Mrs. Chen in the hallway with a casserole dish. "For you and Sophie," she said, pressing the dish into his hands before he could refuse. "You look terrible. Eat something." "Thanks, Mrs. Chen." "That girl who was staying with you, she's gone?" "Yeah, she's gone." Mrs. Chen studied his face with the kind of knowing expression that came from 70 years of watching people struggle. Sometimes people come into our lives for reasons we don't understand right away. Sometimes people are just liars. Maybe, she patted his arm, but maybe not. Be careful, Miles. You have a daughter who needs you. He carried the casserole inside and set it on the counter next to the stack of bills and the USB drive he'd hidden in a coffee mug. Careful. Right. Because nothing about his life was careful anymore. His phone rang. Unknown number. Miles answered it. "Hello? It's me." Lena's voice was quiet, cautious. "You called. Where are you?" "Somewhere safe, for now." "Are they looking for you?" "Probably. I haven't checked the news yet." Miles walked to his laptop and Googled Lena Cade missing. 3 articles popped up immediately, all from this morning. Billionaire's daughter vanishes. Graham Cade offers reward for information. Family desperate for answers. "They're saying you've been kidnapped," Miles said. "Your father's on TV crying about how much he loves you." Lena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Of course he is. It's a good narrative. Poor victimized billionaire whose ungrateful daughter stole from him." "You did steal from him." "I stole evidence of his crimes. There's a difference." "Not to him." "No, not to him." A pause. "You said you couldn't do this alone. Does that mean you want to try?" Miles looked at the USB drive sitting in the coffee mug, at Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator, at the apartment that was barely held together and the life that had fallen apart and the wife who'd been murdered for profit. "Yeah," he said. "I want to try, but I don't know how." "Then let me help you. That's why I came to you in the first place." "You came to me because my wife was on the victim list." "I came to you because you deserve to know the truth, and because I hoped that together we might actually have a chance." "A chance at what? Taking down your father?" "Yes." Miles sat down at the wobbly table that Lena had fixed. "He's going to destroy us. You know that, right? People like him don't lose. They just bury people like us until we disappear." "Maybe," Lena said, "but I have to try. And I think you do too, so let's be stupid together." Miles should have said no, should have hung up and mailed the files to the police and moved on with his life. Should have protected Sophie and himself and stayed as far away from this as humanly possible. Instead, he said, "Okay, tell me what we need to do." And outside his window, a black SUV pulled up to the curb and parked with the kind of deliberate stillness that suggested whoever was inside was very interested in apartment 3C. The hunt had begun. The SUV sat there like a sleeping predator, its tinted windows reflecting the gray afternoon sky. Miles stood at his living room window with the phone pressed against his ear, his heart doing something that felt less like beating and more like trying to escape through his rib cage. "Lena," he said quietly, "there's a black SUV outside my building." Her sharp intake of breath told him everything he needed to know. "How many people?" "I can't see inside. The windows are too dark." "Okay. Listen to me carefully. Don't go outside. Don't answer the door if they knock. And whatever you do, don't let them know you have those files." Little late for that advice. I called you from my personal phone. If they're monitoring, they're not monitoring your phone yet. You're nobody to them. Just a warehouse worker who happened to rent me a room. But that changes the second they think you have something they want. Miles moved away from the window, suddenly aware that standing in plain view while discussing corporate espionage was probably not the smartest move. So what do I do? You act normal. If they come to the door, you tell them I rented a room, I left, you don't know where I went. You're confused and a little annoyed because I still owed you for utilities. That's it. Nothing more. And the USB drive? Hide it. Not in your apartment. If they get a warrant, they'll tear the place apart, somewhere public, somewhere they wouldn't think to look. Miles glanced at the coffee mug on his counter. I have an idea. Good. Do it now. I'll call you back in an hour. She paused. Miles? Thank you for not turning me in. Don't thank me yet. This might be the dumbest thing I've ever done. Probably, but at least it's the right kind of stupid. She hung up, and Miles was left standing in his kitchen with a USB drive full of evidence that could bring down a billionaire and approximately zero idea how to keep himself and his daughter alive long enough to use it. He grabbed the drive from the coffee mug and stood there turning it over in his fingers. Public place. Somewhere they wouldn't look. Somewhere he could access, but that wasn't connected to him in any obvious way. His eyes landed on Sophie's backpack hanging by the door, covered in pins and patches from places they'd never actually visited, souvenirs from the dollar store that let her pretend they took vacations. One of the patches showed a cartoon library with the words, "Reading is magic," stitched in cheerful letters. The library. Sarah had worked there before she died. Miles still knew some of the staff, and libraries had public computers, copy machines, a dozen places where a small red USB drive could disappear into plain sight. He grabbed his jacket and keys, shoved the drive in his pocket, and headed for the door. Then stopped. If they were watching the building, they'd follow him. And if they followed him, they'd see wherever he hid the evidence, unless he gave them a reason not to follow. Miles pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Chen. She answered on the second ring, probably because she'd been standing near the phone waiting for something interesting to happen. "Mrs. Chen, it's Miles. I need a huge favor." "What kind of favor?" "The kind where you pretend to have a plumbing emergency, so I have an excuse to be walking around the building with a toolbox." There was a pause. "Are you in some kind of trouble, Miles?" "Maybe. Probably. I'm not sure yet." "Does this have to do with that girl who left?" "Yeah." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "My kitchen sink is making terrible noises. Very concerning. You should come look at it right away." Miles felt a rush of gratitude so strong it almost choked him. "Thank you. And Miles, be careful. Those men in that car, they don't look like the friendly type." He hung up and grabbed his toolbox from the hall closet, the one he used for odd jobs around the building. Then he walked out of his apartment, locked the door with hands that were steadier than he felt, and headed down the hallway toward Mrs. Chen's place. The SUV was still there when he glanced out the stairwell window, still watching, still waiting. Mrs. Chen opened her door before he could knock, ushering him inside with the kind of urgency usually reserved for natural disasters. Her apartment smelled like ginger and was approximately 400 degrees because she kept her heat cranked up to levels that would make Satan comfortable. "Thank you for this," Miles said. "Your Sarah helped my grandson with his college applications," Mrs. Chen replied, already filling her kettle even though Miles hadn't asked for tea. "She spent hours with him, didn't charge anything. Good people deserve help. So tell me, what's really going on?" Miles set his toolbox on her counter and pulled out a wrench he didn't actually need. "The less you know, the safer you are." "I'm 73 years old. Safe is boring." Despite everything, Miles almost smiled. "The girl who was renting my room, her father is a very powerful, very dangerous man. She has evidence that he did something terrible, and now he's looking for her, and probably looking for anything she might have left behind. Mrs. Chen absorbed this information while pouring hot water over tea leaves. Evidence of what? Murder. Mass murder, technically, including my wife. The kettle stopped pouring. Mrs. Chen set it down carefully and turned to look at him with eyes that had seen wars and revolutions and every shade of human cruelty. You're going to try to bring him down. I'm going to try not to get killed. Bringing him down would be a bonus. You need a lawyer. I need a miracle. Sometimes they're the same thing. She pushed a cup of tea toward him. Drink. You look like you're about to pass out. Miles took the cup because refusing would have been rude, and because Mrs. Chen was right. He did feel like he was about to pass out. The tea was some kind of herbal thing that tasted like flowers and earth, and it was probably supposed to be calming, but mostly just made him aware of how badly his hands were shaking. I need to get something to the library, he said, but I can't let them see me go there. Is there still a back exit through the basement? There is, if you don't mind going through the storage area. It's full of junk, but the door opens into the alley behind the building. That works. Mrs. Chen studied him for a long moment. This evidence, it's real? It's solid? It's real. Then don't hide it in the library. Too public. Too many cameras. Too many ways for them to track it down if they figure out where you went. She walked to her bookshelf and pulled out a thick hardcover, some doorstop of a novel about Chinese history. She opened it to reveal that the center had been hollowed out. My husband used to keep important papers and books. Said libraries were the safest place because no one actually reads anymore. Mrs. Chen, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. That drive stays here in my apartment, hidden somewhere they'd never think to look. You're just a handyman who came to fix my sink. Nothing suspicious about that. Miles wanted to argue, wanted to tell her this was too dangerous, wanted to protect her the way he couldn't protect Sarah. But he also knew she was right. The library would have security footage. There would be a record of him being there, and if Cade Industries came looking, that record would lead them straight to the evidence. He pulled the USB drive from his pocket and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of 17 lives and all the proof of their murders concentrated in 2 inches of plastic and circuitry. If anything happens to me, he said, this needs to get to the police, or the FBI, or the news, someone who can actually do something with it. Mrs. Chen took the drive and the hollowed book. Nothing's going to happen to you. You have a daughter who needs you. That means you're going to survive this. She slipped the drive into the book's hidden compartment and closed it, then slid it back onto the shelf between 2 other equally intimidating volumes. Now make some noise with that wrench so it sounds like you're actually fixing something. Miles spent 15 minutes banging around under her sink while Mrs. Chen gave a running commentary on everything that was allegedly wrong with her plumbing. By the time he left, anyone listening would have been convinced that he'd just saved her from a catastrophic pipe failure. He walked back to his apartment with his toolbox, very deliberately not looking at the SUV. Inside, he set the toolbox down and tried to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do next. His phone rang. Lena. Did you hide it? Yeah, it's safe. Good. Now we need to talk about what comes next. What comes next is I pick up my daughter from school and pretend everything is normal. Miles, they're going to come to your door, tonight probably, and when they do, you need to be ready. Ready how? You want me to fight off Billionaire security? I want you to record everything, every word they say, every threat they make, every time they cross a line. We need documentation. We need proof that they're trying to cover this up. Miles laughed, but it came out sounding slightly unhinged. You want me to record them intimidating me? That's your plan. It's part of the plan. We need to show a pattern of behavior. We need to prove that Graham Cade isn't just a businessman who made mistakes. He's a criminal actively trying to silence witnesses. I'm not a witness. I'm just someone who happened to rent you a room. You became a witness the second you looked at those files, and they know it, or they wouldn't be sitting outside your building. Miles walked to the window again. The SUV was still there, and now he could see 2 figures in the front seats, waiting, watching, patient in the way that apex predators were patient. Okay, he said. Say I record them. Say I get proof they're trying to intimidate me. Then what? We go to the police? Eventually. But first we need more. We need witnesses who'll testify. We need journalists who'll run the story even if they get threatened. We need to make this so public, so undeniable, that even Graham Cade's lawyers can't bury it. You're talking about months of work. I don't have months. I have bills due next week and a daughter who needs stability, not a father who's fighting a shadow war with a billionaire. I know, but Miles, her voice cracked slightly. 17 people died. 17 families got destroyed the way yours did, and there are probably more we don't even know about. If we don't do this, if we just let it go, then Sarah's death meant nothing. They all died for nothing. And Graham Cade gets to keep doing this to other people in other places because there's no one brave enough to stop him. Miles closed his eyes and saw Sarah's face. The way she'd looked on their wedding day, laughing at something stupid he'd said. The way she'd looked holding Sophie for the first time, terrified and amazed. The way she'd looked in the hospital bed at the end, too weak to keep her eyes open, but squeezing his hand like she could anchor herself to life through sheer force of will. Okay, he said. Tell me what to do. They spent the next hour planning. Lena explained how to set his phone to record without it being obvious. She told him what kind of questions to ask to get them to incriminate themselves. She warned him about the tactics they'd use, the casual threats disguised as concern, the implications that cooperation was in his best interest, the suggestions that accidents could happen to people who made trouble. They won't hurt you, she said. Not yet. Right now they just want to know what I told you and where the files are. They're counting on you being scared enough to cooperate. I am scared. Good. Use that. Let them think they're in control. Let them get comfortable. People make mistakes when they think they've already won. By the time they finished talking, Miles had to leave to pick up Sophie. The SUV followed him to the school, staying 3 cars back but never losing sight of his truck. They followed him to the grocery store where he bought ingredients for spaghetti because it was cheap, and Sophie would eat it without complaining. They followed him back to the apartment building and watched him carry groceries and his daughter inside. Sophie noticed, of course. Kids always noticed the things adults tried to hide. Daddy, why is that car following us? It's not following us, Bug. It's just going the same direction. It's been parked outside since this morning. Miles unlocked their apartment door and tried to keep his voice casual. Maybe someone's visiting the building. For 8 hours? 8 years old and already too smart for her own good. He made a mental note to encourage slightly less observant behavior. They ate spaghetti at the wobbly table that Lena had fixed, and Miles tried not to think about the fact that the girl who'd sat in that empty chair 3 days ago was now in hiding while her father's hired muscle waited downstairs. Sophie talked about school, something about a science project on volcanoes, and Miles made appropriate responses while his brain ran through every possible scenario for what was going to happen when someone finally knocked on his door. They came at 9:47. Sophie was already in bed, though Miles doubted she was actually asleep. The knock was firm, but not aggressive. 3 measured raps that could have belonged to anyone. Miles took a breath, hit record on his phone, and slipped it into his shirt pocket with the microphone facing out. He opened the door to find 2 men in dark suits. One was mid-40s, built like he spent serious time in a gym, with the kind of haircut that cost more than Miles's monthly rent. The other was younger, maybe 30, leaner, but with the same predatory stillness. Miles Hart, the older one said. Yeah, can I help you? I'm Richard Voss. This is my colleague, Mr. Chen. We're with Cade Industries Security. We'd like to ask you a few questions about Lena Cade. Miles made himself look confused. Who? Lena Cade. I believe she rented a room in your apartment recently. Oh, the college girl. Yeah, she stayed here for about 2 weeks. Left a few days ago. Voss smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. May we come in? This won't take long. Every instinct Miles had screamed at him to say no, to close the door, to call the police. Instead, he stepped back and let them into his apartment, into the space where his daughter was sleeping and his wife's memory still lived in the corners. The 2 men moved through his living room like they owned it, taking in every detail with the practiced eye of people who assessed threats for a living. Voss settled onto the couch without being invited. Chen remained standing by the door, blocking the exit in a way that was probably meant to look casual, but absolutely wasn't. "So," Voss said, "tell me about your relationship with Lena." "There's no relationship. She answered my ad for a room, paid rent, kept to herself. That's it." "She didn't tell you who her father was?" "She said her last name was Cade. I didn't make the connection until after she left." "And why did she leave?" Miles had rehearsed this part with Lena. "Keep it simple. Keep it believable." "I don't know. She packed up one afternoon and said she had to go. Didn't give a reason. I was annoyed because she didn't give notice, but she'd paid through the end of the month, so technically, she didn't owe me anything." Voss studied him with eyes that missed nothing. "She didn't seem upset, scared. She seemed in a hurry. Look, what's this about? Is she in trouble? She's missing. Her family is very concerned. They're worried she might have gotten involved with people who want to hurt her, or use her to hurt them." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Miles forced himself to meet Voss's gaze. "I don't know anything about that. Like I said, she rented a room. We weren't friends." "But you let her live with your daughter." The mention of Sophie sent ice down Miles' spine. "I let her rent a room in an apartment where my daughter also lives. That's not the same thing." "Still, you must have talked sometimes. She must have mentioned where she was going, what she was doing." "She said she was a nursing student. She talked about classes and homework. That's about it." Chen spoke for the first time, his voice soft in a way that somehow made it more threatening. "Mr. Hart, Lena Cade stole proprietary information from her father's company. Information that could damage a lot of people if it ends up in the wrong hands. If you know where she is, or if she left anything here, she didn't leave anything, and I don't know where she is." Voss leaned forward slightly. "Here's the thing, Miles. Can I call you Miles? You seem like a reasonable guy, working man, single father, just trying to get by. I respect that. And I think you're smart enough to understand that getting involved in Cade family business would be very, very bad for you and your daughter." There it was, the threat wrapped in concern. Miles felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice level. "I'm not involved in anything. A girl rented a room, then she left. That's the whole story." "We'd like to look around," Voss said. It wasn't a question. "You got a warrant?" "We don't need a warrant. We're not law enforcement. We're just trying to find a young woman who might be in danger." "Then I guess you'll need to find her somewhere else. I'd like you to leave now." Voss didn't move. "You're making this difficult." "I'm protecting my home and my daughter. If that's difficult, that's your problem." For a long moment, nobody moved. Chen's hand drifted toward his jacket in a way that made Miles wonder if these guys were armed. Then Voss smiled again, that same cold expression that had nothing to do with humor. "Okay, Miles, we'll go. But let me give you some friendly advice." He stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. "Whatever Lena told you, whatever she might have shown you, forget it. Mr. Cade is a very powerful man with very powerful friends. People who cross him tend to have unfortunate accidents. Their lives fall apart in ways that seem completely unrelated, but somehow always trace back to bad decisions they made." "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning. There's a difference." Voss walked to the door, pausing to look back. "We'll be around if you change your mind about talking. For your sake and your daughter's, I hope you make the smart choice." They left, and Miles locked the door behind them with shaking hands. He stood there for a full minute, listening to his heart try to break out of his chest, before he pulled his phone from his pocket and stopped the recording. He had it. Every word, every threat. Sophie's door opened. She stood in the hallway in her pajamas, clutching Mr. Hopscotch. "Daddy? Who were those men?" Miles crossed to her and picked her up, even though she was really getting too big for that. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. "Nobody important, Bug." They sounded mean. Yeah, they were pretty mean. He carried her back to her room and tucked her into bed, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "But they're gone now." "Are they going to come back?" He wanted to lie. Wanted to tell her everything would be fine, that the bad men were gone forever, that she was safe. But Sophie deserved better than comfortable lies. "Maybe," he said. "But if they do, I'll handle it. That's my job, keeping you safe. And I'm very good at my job." "Promise?" "Promise." She closed her eyes, and Miles sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing evened out into sleep. Then he went back to the living room, pulled out his laptop, and called Lena. "They came," he said when she answered. "Are you okay?" "I got it all recorded. Threats, intimidation, everything." "Good. Send it to me. I know someone who might be able to help. A journalist who's been investigating Cade Industries for years. She's careful, she's thorough, and she doesn't scare easily." "What's her name?" "Rebecca Sutton. She writes for the Tribune. If we give her the evidence plus documentation of them trying to silence us, she might be willing to run the story." Miles pulled up his email and started attaching the audio file. "And then what? We just hope that public exposure protects us?" "We hope that public exposure forces the authorities to actually investigate. Right now, Graham Cade has enough power to make this disappear. But if it becomes a national story, if people start asking questions, if other victims start coming forward, he can't bury all of that. You have a lot of faith in the system. I have faith in people being really angry when they find out they've been lied to and poisoned for profit. And I have faith in you." Her voice softened. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for being brave." "I'm not brave. I'm terrified." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." Miles hit send on the email and closed his laptop. Outside, the SUV was still parked on the street, a dark shape against the glow of streetlights. Watching. Waiting. "Lena? What if this doesn't work? What if we do everything right and he still wins?" She was quiet for a moment. "Then at least we tried. At least we didn't let him get away with it without a fight. That has to count for something." "Does it?" "I think so. I hope so." A pause. "Get some sleep, Miles. Tomorrow we start building the case. Tomorrow we figure out how to make sure Graham Cade pays for every life he destroyed." "Including yours?" "Especially mine." She hung up, and Miles sat in his dark living room thinking about justice and revenge and whether there was any real difference between the two. He thought about Sarah, about the life they were supposed to have, about the future that had been stolen by chemicals in water and greed in boardrooms. He thought about Sophie sleeping down the hall, about the world she was growing up in, about the lessons she was learning from watching her father either give up or fight back. And he thought about Lena Cade, a 20-year-old girl who'd walked away from billions of dollars and a life of comfort to expose her own father as a murderer, who'd risked everything on the hope that truth might actually matter, who'd chosen Miles, a nobody with nothing, as her partner in trying to bring down an empire. It was insane. It was impossible. It was probably going to get them both killed. But for the first time since Sarah died, Miles felt like he had a purpose beyond just surviving, beyond just getting through another day and another shift and another stack of bills. He had a reason to be angry instead of just sad, a reason to fight instead of just endure. He stood up and walked to Sophie's door, opening it just enough to see her sleeping peacefully with Mr. Hopscotch tucked under one arm. She looked so small in that bed, so vulnerable, so completely dependent on him to make the right choices. "I'm going to get them, Sarah," he whispered into the darkness. "For you, for Sophie, for everyone they hurt. I'm going to make sure they pay." The apartment didn't answer. It never did. But somewhere out there, Lena Cade was hiding and planning and gathering allies. Somewhere out there, Rebecca Sutton was reading an email with audio evidence of corporate intimidation. Somewhere out there, the pieces were moving into place for a confrontation that would either destroy Graham Cade or destroy everyone who dared to challenge him. Miles closed Sophie's door and went to his own room. He didn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to the building settle around him, to the sounds of other people's lives continuing on the other side of thin walls. Normal people with normal problems. People who didn't have USB drives full of evidence hidden in their elderly neighbors' hollowed-out books. People who weren't being hunted by billionaire security teams. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Rebecca Sutton. I listened to your recording. We need to meet. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Java Joe's on 5th Street. Come alone." Miles stared at the message. This was it. The moment where he either committed fully to this insane plan or backed out before things got worse. He could still delete the files, could still tell Voss that Lena had left nothing behind, could still save himself and Sophie from whatever storm was coming. He typed back, "I'll be there." Outside, the SUV's engine started. It pulled away from the curb slowly, almost reluctantly, like a wolf that had decided to come back later when the prey was more vulnerable. Miles watched it disappear around the corner and wondered how long it would be before they realized he'd just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. In Mrs. Chen's apartment, hidden in a book about Chinese history that nobody would ever think to open, a red USB drive contained the evidence to bring down an empire. And in this apartment, in this moment, Miles' heart decided that some fights were worth having even if you knew you were going to lose. Some truths were worth telling even if the cost was everything. Tomorrow, he would meet Rebecca Sutton. Tomorrow, he would take the next step. Tomorrow, he would continue choosing courage over safety. But tonight, he sat in his dark bedroom and let himself be afraid. Because Lena was right, being brave and being terrified weren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes they were exactly the same thing. Java Joe's was the kind of coffee shop that tried too hard to be hip. Exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, a chalkboard menu written in handwriting so deliberately messy it was almost illegible. Miles arrived 15 minutes early because that's what you did when you were meeting a journalist who might be your only hope of not getting disappeared by a billionaire. He ordered black coffee he didn't want and sat at a corner table where he could watch the door. Sophie was with Mrs. Chen. Miles had told his daughter it was a job interview, which wasn't entirely a lie. He was interviewing for the position of guy who takes down corrupt corporations, and the pay was probably going to be non-existent, assuming he survived long enough to collect it. The SUV hadn't followed him this time. He'd taken 3 buses and walked the last 6 blocks just to be sure, checking over his shoulder so many times he probably looked like he was having some kind of neurological episode. But he'd made it here alone, and that had to count for something. Rebecca Sutton walked in at exactly 2 p.m. Miles recognized her from her byline photo, mid-30s, short dark hair, glasses that were probably more fashion than function, wearing jeans and a leather jacket that had seen better days. She scanned the room with the practiced eye of someone who'd conducted meetings in public places before, spotted Miles almost immediately, and walked over. "Miles Hart?" She didn't offer to shake hands. "Yeah, Rebecca Sutton." "Obviously." She dropped into the chair across from him and pulled out a laptop that was covered in stickers, press credentials, political slogans, a fading resist that looked like it had been there since 2016. "Let's skip the pleasantries. You have evidence that Graham K. deliberately poisoned a water supply, covered it up, and murdered 17 people, including your wife. That about sum it up?" Miles blinked at her directness. "That's the short version." "And Lena Cade gave you this evidence?" "She did." "Where is she now?" "I don't know, hiding somewhere. Her father's people have been looking for her." Rebecca pulled up a file on her laptop and turned it so Miles could see. It was a photo of Lena at what looked like a charity event, standing next to Graham Cade with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've been investigating Cade Industries for 3 years. Every time I get close to something real, witnesses disappear or recant their statements or suddenly can't remember what they told me. Every document I request gets buried in legal challenges. Every source I cultivate gets threatened or bought off. Graham Cade is very, very good at making problems go away." "So why are you still trying?" "Because I'm stubborn, and because I knew there was something there. I just couldn't prove it." She closed the laptop and leaned forward. "Then I get your email last night with audio of his security goons threatening a single father in his own home. That's leverage. That's documentation. That's the kind of thing that makes prosecutors pay attention." "What about the files? The evidence of the contamination?" "I need to see them. All of them. Every document, every email, every piece of data Lena managed to steal. And I need to verify it's real before I stake my career on a story that could get me sued into oblivion, or worse." Miles had expected this. He pulled out his phone and texted Mrs. Chen, "We need the book." Her response came back 30 seconds later. "Come get it. I made cookies." He looked at Rebecca. "The drive is hidden somewhere safe. I can get it, but I need to know you're serious about running this story. I need to know you won't back down when Cade comes after you." "Oh, he'll come after me. He'll threaten legal action. He'll try to dig up dirt on my personal life. He'll probably call my editor and demand I be fired. That's how guys like Graham Cade operate. They use fear and money to control the narrative. Rebecca's expression hardened. But here's what he doesn't know about me. My mother died of cancer that could have been prevented if the chemical plant near her house had been honest about their emissions. I've spent my entire career trying to hold corporations accountable for valuing profit over human life. So yeah, Miles, I'm serious. And I don't back down. Something in Miles' chest unclenched slightly. Okay, the drive is at my apartment building. We can go get it now. Not we, you. If Cade's people are watching you, showing up with a journalist is going to set off alarm bells. You get the drive, copy everything onto a secure cloud storage, and send me the link. I'll start going through the documents tonight. And then what? Then I start making calls. I'll need to get corroboration from other sources. Environmental experts who can verify the contamination data, legal experts who can explain what laws were broken, maybe some of the other victims if they're willing to talk. This needs to be airtight before I publish because the second the story goes live, Cade Industries will throw everything they have at trying to discredit it. Miles felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. This wasn't going to be quick. This wasn't going to be simple. This was going to be weeks or months of careful investigation while he tried to keep himself and Sophie safe from people who had unlimited resources and zero conscience. How long? He asked. 2 weeks minimum. Maybe 3. I know that's not what you want to hear, but if we rush this, if we publish before it's bulletproof, Graham Cade walks away, and we'll never get another chance. 2 weeks of looking over my shoulder. 2 weeks of wondering if they're going to grab me on my way to work, or threaten Sophie's school, or... Which is why you need to be smart, Rebecca interrupted. Vary your routine. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it. Keep your phone charged and keep people informed of where you're going. And document everything, every interaction with Cade's people, every suspicious car, every hint that they're escalating. We're building a pattern of behavior here, and the more evidence we have of their intimidation tactics, the harder it is for them to claim they're the victims. Miles thought about Sophie's face when she'd asked if the bad men were coming back. What about witness protection or something? Can we get that? Not yet. We're not at the level where law enforcement is officially involved. Once the story breaks and prosecutors start investigating, then maybe. But right now, you're on your own. Great, that's really reassuring. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. Look, I know this is scary. I know you're putting yourself at risk, but what you're doing matters. Those 17 people, your wife included, they deserve justice. And the only way they get it is if people like you are willing to stand up and fight. Miles finished his coffee, which had gone cold while they talked. I keep hearing that this matters, that it's worth it. But sometimes I wonder if it's fair to Sophie. She didn't ask for any of this. No kid asks for their parent to be a hero. They just want their parent to be safe. But someday she's going to be old enough to understand what you did and why. And she's going to be proud. Or she's going to resent me for putting her in danger. Maybe both. Rebecca stood and shouldered her bag. Get me those files, Miles. Let me start building the case. And in the meantime, stay visible, stay in public. Don't give them an opportunity to make you disappear quietly. Set. She left without saying goodbye, and Miles sat alone at the corner table, wondering how his life had gone from struggling single dad to key witness in corporate murder case in the span of 2 weeks. His phone buzzed. Lena. How did it go? She wants the files. She says it'll take 2 or 3 weeks to verify everything and build the story. That's longer than I hoped. Yeah, well, apparently bringing down billionaires takes time. Who knew? Miles stood and headed for the door, already planning his route back to the apartment. She seems solid, though. She's got her own reasons for wanting to nail your father. Good. We're going to need all the help we can get. Lena paused. Miles, there's something you should know. I've been monitoring my father's communications. How are you monitoring his communications? I still have access to some of his systems. He hasn't figured out how I'm doing it yet, which gives us an advantage. But according to what I'm seeing, he's getting nervous. The longer I'm missing, the more unstable this whole thing becomes for him. He can't report the stolen files without admitting what's in them, but he also can't just let me disappear without people asking questions. So what's he going to do? He's going to try to control the narrative. He's going to paint me as mentally unstable, maybe claim I had a breakdown, suggest that anything I might say should be viewed as the delusions of a troubled young woman. And he's going to come after you harder because you're the link to me. Miles stepped out onto the street and immediately scanned for black SUVs. Nothing obvious, but that didn't mean they weren't there. They already came to my apartment. What's harder than that? They'll go after your livelihood, your reputation. They'll try to isolate you, make it so no one believes you even if you do come forward with evidence. It's what my father does. He destroys people systematically until they have nothing left to fight with. I don't have much to destroy. I'm already broke and barely employed. You have Sophie, and they know that's your pressure point. The words hit Miles like a physical blow. He stopped walking, standing frozen on the sidewalk while people flowed around him. If they touch my daughter, they won't hurt her, but they might threaten to. They might suggest that Child Protective Services should take a closer look at your living situation. They might imply that a single father who's clearly unstable and making wild accusations about prominent businessmen isn't fit to raise a child. Lena's voice was tight with anger. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I brought this into your life. You didn't bring it into my life. Your father did that when he poisoned my wife. Miles started walking again, faster now. I'm getting the files to Rebecca tonight. We're doing this. And if Graham Cade wants to come after me, he can get in line behind every other person who's tried to knock me down. He hung up and caught the next bus, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Sophie taken away, his name dragged through the mud, his face plastered on news sites as some conspiracy theorist who'd harassed a grieving father looking for his missing daughter, but then he thought about Sarah's name in that file. Casualty. Like she was collateral damage, like her life had been worth less than a line item in a corporate budget. No, he wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Mrs. Chen was waiting when he got back to the building, and she handed over the hollowed book without comment. Miles took it to his apartment, locked the door, and spent the next 2 hours copying every file from the USB drive to a secure cloud storage account Rebecca had set up. Emails, reports, data tables, internal memos, 17 names on a list that should never have existed. He sent Rebecca the access link and got back a response almost immediately. Got it. This is good, Miles. This is really good. I'll be in touch. Sophie came home from Mrs. Chen's apartment chattering about the cookies they'd made. Chocolate chip with too much sugar, which according to Sophie made them perfect. She was covered in flour and happiness, and for a few minutes Miles let himself pretend everything was normal. That they were just a father and daughter making dinner together, that there weren't people out there plotting how to destroy them. They were eating pasta, again because it was cheap and filling, when someone knocked on the door, not the measured knock from before. This was aggressive, demanding, the kind of knock that said, open up or we're coming in anyway. Miles's blood went cold. Sophie, go to your room. But Daddy, now, lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. She ran, her eyes wide with fear, and Miles heard her door slam and the lock click. He pulled out his phone, made sure it was recording, and opened the door. Voss stood there with 3 other men, all dressed in suits that probably cost more than Miles' monthly rent. But it was the expression on Voss's face that made Miles' stomach drop, cold fury barely contained behind a professional mask. We need to talk, Voss said. I think we covered everything last time. That was before you met with Rebecca Sutton. That was before you decided to involve the press in a private family matter. That was before you made this personal. So they'd been following him. Of course they'd been following him. Miles kept his hand on the door, ready to slam it if they tried to push their way in. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence, Mr. Hart. We know you met with a journalist this afternoon. We know Lena gave you files. We know you're planning to go public with information that was stolen from Cade Industries, and we're here to give you one last chance to make the right choice. Which is? Give us the files. Tell us where Lena is. Walk away from this before you get hurt. Miles felt something inside him shift. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was just the realization that he'd already crossed too many lines to turn back now. No, he said simply. Voss's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. You're making a mistake. Probably. But it's my mistake to make. Think about your daughter, Mr. Hart. Think about what happens to her if you're not around to take care of her. Think about how Child Protective Services might view a father who's putting his child in danger by antagonizing powerful people. There it was. The threat Lena had warned him about. Miles felt his jaw tighten. Are you threatening to have my daughter taken away? I'm suggesting that your current behavior might raise questions about your fitness as a parent. Questions that authorities would be obligated to investigate. It would be a shame if Sophie ended up in the foster system because you couldn't let go of a conspiracy theory. Miles pulled his phone from his pocket and held it up so Voss could see the recording app was running. Say that again, about taking my daughter. I want to make sure I got it clearly on tape. For the first time, Voss looked uncertain. Recording private conversations without consent is illegal in this state. So is threatening to have someone's child removed as retaliation for whistleblowing. I figure we're even. Miles met his gaze steadily. You can tell Graham Cade that I'm not giving him the files. I'm not telling him where Lena is, and I'm not backing down. Whatever he does to me, it's going to be documented, recorded, and handed over to people who actually give a damn about justice. You're going to regret this. I regret a lot of things. Standing up to bullies isn't going to be one of them. Voss stared at him for a long moment, and Miles could almost see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Then he stepped back. This isn't over. I didn't think it was. They left, and Miles locked the door with shaking hands. He stopped the recording and immediately sent it to Rebecca with a message. They just threatened to have my daughter taken away. Is this enough? Her response came back fast. It's perfect. This is exactly the kind of overreach we need. Forward this to me as a secured file and don't delete the original. And Miles, be careful. They're escalating. Sophie emerged from her room looking pale. Daddy, I heard what they said. Are they going to take me away? Miles pulled her into a hug so tight she squeaked. No, Bug. They're not taking you anywhere. They were just trying to scare me. Did it work? Yeah, it worked. But I'm not letting fear make my decisions anymore. She pulled back to look at him. Are you in trouble because of Lena? It was the first time she'd said Lena's name since the girl had left, and Miles realized his daughter was smarter than he'd given her credit for. She'd been watching, listening, putting pieces together. Yeah, he said. I'm in trouble because Lena's father did something really bad, and Lena asked me to help her prove it, and now he's trying to stop us. Is that why Mommy died? Because of Lena's father? Miles felt tears prick his eyes. Yeah, Bug, that's why. He made decisions that hurt a lot of people, including Mom, and I'm trying to make sure he pays for that. Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, good. He should pay. Mom was nice and he was mean, and that's not fair. No, baby, it's not fair. So we're going to fight him. We're going to try. She nodded seriously, like they'd just agreed on something important. Okay, but Daddy, I'm scared. Me too, but we're going to be scared together, okay? And we're going to be smart, and we're going to win. He hoped that was true. He hoped they weren't just walking into a trap that would destroy everything they had left. But standing there with his daughter in his arms, knowing that Sarah's death hadn't been random bad luck, but deliberate corporate murder, he couldn't imagine making any other choice. That night, after Sophie was finally asleep, Miles sat on his couch and went through everything he knew. The files on the USB drive, the recordings of Voss's threats, Rebecca's promise to investigate thoroughly, Lena's warnings about her father's tactics. He pulled out a notebook, one of Sophie's from school, covered in unicorn stickers, and started writing down everything. Dates, times, conversations, evidence. He created a timeline of events starting with Sarah's death and ending with today's confrontation. He documented every interaction with Lena, every detail she'd shared, every file name on the USB drive. If something happened to him, someone needed to be able to pick up where he left off. His phone rang at midnight. Unknown number again. Hello? Mr. Hart, this is FBI Special Agent Maria Torres. Rebecca Sutton contacted our office with information about potential corporate fraud and manslaughter. I'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. Miles sat up straight, his heart hammering. The FBI? Yes, sir. Based on the preliminary evidence Ms. Sutton shared, we believe there may be grounds for a federal investigation into Cade Industries. But we need your cooperation and your testimony. Are you willing to speak with us? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Good. Can you come to our field office tomorrow morning? Say 9 a.m.? Miles thought about his work schedule, about Sophie's school, about the SUV that might follow him. I'll be there. Do I need a lawyer? You're not under investigation, Mr. Hart. You're a witness. But if you'd feel more comfortable with legal representation, that's your right. I can't afford a lawyer. We can discuss options when you come in. For now, just bring any documentation you have, recordings, emails, anything that supports your account of events with Cade Industries representatives. They made arrangements for the meeting, and Miles hung up feeling like he'd just stepped off a cliff. The FBI. This was real now. This was happening. He called Lena. The FBI wants to talk to me. She let out a breath. Rebecca works fast. Is this good? Should I trust them? It's complicated. My father has connections everywhere, including in law enforcement. But the FBI is harder to corrupt than local police. And if Rebecca vouched for this agent, she's probably legitimate. What do I tell them? Everything, every detail. Don't hold anything back. And Miles, this is where it gets dangerous. Once federal investigators are officially involved, my father can't make this go away quietly. He's going to have to fight back hard, and that means going after everyone connected to the case. You need to be prepared for that. I'm prepared. Are you? Because he's going to try to destroy your credibility. He's going to dig up every mistake you've ever made, every bill you've paid late, every time you've been less than perfect. He's going to paint you as an opportunist looking for a payout, or a conspiracy theorist with a grudge. And he's going to do it on every news channel and every social media platform until people start believing it. Miles thought about his life. The repossessed car, the overdue rent, the second job that was barely legal, the times he'd paid bills with money meant for groceries. There's plenty to find. But none of it makes the evidence false. None of it means Sarah wasn't murdered. That's what matters. That's what we have to keep front and center. Okay, I'll talk to the FBI tomorrow. I'll tell them everything. And then what? Then we wait, and we hope that the system actually works the way it's supposed to. Miles laughed bitterly. You have a lot more faith in the system than I do. I have faith in you. That has to be enough. After they hung up, Miles sat in his dark apartment and thought about faith, about trust, about the hope that truth might actually matter in a world where money usually won. The next morning, he dropped Sophie at school with extra hugs and promises to pick her up on time. Then he took 2 buses to the FBI field office, checking constantly to see if he was being followed. If he was, they were better at it than before because he didn't spot anyone. The field office was exactly what he'd expected. Institutional gray walls, security checkpoints, people in suits moving with purpose through hallways that all looked identical. Agent Torres met him in the lobby, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a handshake that meant business. Mr. Hart, thank you for coming. Follow me. She led him to an interview room that felt less interrogation and more conference. A table with comfortable chairs, a water pitcher, even a box of tissues in case things got emotional. Miles sat down and tried not to feel like he was in over his head. Before we start, Agent Torres said, I want to be clear about what this meeting is. You're a witness, not a suspect. Anything you tell me is protected, and we take witness safety very seriously. If at any point you feel threatened or unsafe, you contact me immediately. Understood? Understood. Good. Now tell me everything, starting with when you first met Lena Cade. So Miles told her about the room for rent, about Lena's 2 perfect cash payments and the bracelet with Cade Industries stamped on it, about finding the USB drive and the files that proved 17 people had been murdered for profit, about Sarah's name on that list, about Voss and his threats, about Rebecca and her investigation. He talked for 2 hours, stopping occasionally to drink water or collect himself when the emotions got too strong. Agent Torres listened without interrupting, taking notes in a precise hand that suggested she'd done this hundreds of times before. When he finished, she set down her pen and looked at him. That's quite a story, Mr. Hart. It's the truth. I believe you. And based on the evidence Rebecca shared, I think we have grounds for a full investigation. But I need you to understand what that means. This is going to take time. Months, probably. We'll need to verify every document, interview every potential witness, build a case that will stand up in federal court. And during that time, you're going to be under intense scrutiny from both us and from Cade Industries. I understand. Do you? Because men like Graham Cade don't go down easy. They fight with everything they have: lawyers, money, political connections. They make witnesses disappear or discredit them until no one knows what to believe. Are you prepared for that? Miles thought about Sophie, about Sarah, about 17 names on a list. I don't have a choice. If I don't do this, then my wife died for nothing. All those people died for nothing, and Graham Cade gets to keep killing people until someone finally stops him. Agent Torres studied him for a long moment. Okay, then here's what happens next. We're going to officially open an investigation into Cade Industries and Project Raven Lake. We'll need to take custody of the original USB drive for evidence. You'll need to be available for additional interviews and possibly grand jury testimony, and we'll assign someone to periodically check on your safety. What about protection? We can't put you in witness protection yet, not until we're closer to charges being filed, but we'll have agents monitor your building and we'll give you a direct line to call if anything happens. It's not perfect, but it's what we can offer right now. Miles nodded. It wasn't enough, but it was something. And Lena? We'd like to speak with her as well. If you can arrange that meeting, it would be helpful. I'll try. She's pretty deep underground right now. Understandable. Her father is looking for her too, and I doubt his intentions are as benevolent as ours. Agent Torres stood and gathered her notes. One more thing, Mr. Hart. Once this goes public, once we start executing warrants and bringing people in for questioning, there's no going back. Your life is going to change in ways you can't predict. Are you ready for that? Miles stood too, feeling the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. I've been ready since I found out why my wife died. Let's do this. They shook hands again, and Agent Torres walked him out of the building. On the street, Miles pulled out his phone and called Lena to tell her the FBI was officially involved, that the case was moving forward, that they'd actually done it. She answered on the first ring. How did it go? They believe us. They're opening an investigation. They want to talk to you too. I'll arrange something. Miles, this is it. This is really happening. Yeah, I just hope we survive long enough to see how it ends. We will. We have to. Miles hung up and started walking toward the bus stop, his mind already jumping ahead to what came next. The investigation, the media attention, the courtroom, the moment when Graham Cade would finally have to answer for every life he'd destroyed. He didn't see the car until it was too late. It came out of nowhere, jumping the curb, aiming straight for him with the kind of precision that said this wasn't an accident. Miles dove sideways, hitting the pavement hard, rolling away as the car's bumper missed him by inches. He heard screaming, pedestrians scattering, and then the car was speeding away, disappearing into traffic before anyone could get the license plate. Miles lay on the sidewalk, his hands scraped and bleeding, his heart trying to punch through his chest. People crowded around asking if he was okay, if he needed an ambulance, if someone should call the police. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called Agent Torres. They just tried to kill me, he said when she answered. Graham Cade just tried to have me killed. Agent Torres arrived with 2 other agents in less than 10 minutes, which told Miles everything he needed to know about how seriously they were taking this. He was still sitting on the curb with his scraped palms bleeding onto his jeans, while witnesses gave statements to uniformed officers who'd shown up first. A woman who'd been walking her dog kept saying she'd gotten 3 digits of the license plate. A college kid swore he had video on his phone, but the footage was too shaky to show anything useful. Everyone agreed it had been deliberate. Everyone agreed Miles would be dead if his reflexes had been half a second slower. Torres crouched beside him, her expression grim. Are you hurt? Just scraped up. They missed. This time. She helped him stand, steadying him when his legs wobbled. We're taking you somewhere safe, right now. I can't. I have to pick up my daughter from school in 3 hours. We'll send someone to get her. Miles, listen to me. Someone just tried to murder you in broad daylight on a public street. That's not intimidation, that's elimination, which means they've decided you're too dangerous to let live. The reality of it hit him like a second car. Someone had actually tried to kill him. Not threaten him, not scare him, but end his life right there on the sidewalk outside the FBI building. And if they'd succeeded, Sophie would have been waiting at school forever, wondering why her daddy never came. "We need to move," Torres said, already guiding him toward an unmarked sedan. "Agent Chen is going to take you to a secure location. I'm going to coordinate with local PD and start pulling security footage from every camera in a 3-block radius. We're going to find whoever did this." Miles let himself be loaded into the back of the sedan, his mind moving too slowly to process what was happening. The driver, Agent Chen apparently, pulled into traffic without saying a word, and Miles watched the city slide past the window while his hands continued bleeding onto his pants. His phone rang. "Lena." "I just saw the news," she said without preamble. "Someone tried to run you down outside the FBI office. Tell me you're okay." "I'm alive. That's about the best I can say right now. My father did this. He found out you talked to the FBI and he decided you were too much of a threat. Miles, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I brought this into your life and now tss." "Stop," Miles interrupted. "Your father did this, not you. He's the one who chose profit over people. He's the one who murdered 17 people and tried to make it 18. Don't take responsibility for his evil." She was crying now. He could hear it in her voice. "But I knew he was capable of this. I knew what he'd do if he felt cornered. I should have warned you better. I should have—" "Where are you right now?" "A motel outside the city. I've been moving every few days to stay ahead of his people." "The FBI wants to talk to you. They need your testimony to build the case." "I know. Rebecca already called me. But Miles, if I come forward, if I testify against my father, he'll destroy me. Not just my reputation, my entire life. He'll make sure I can never work, never have relationships, never exist in any meaningful way. That's what he does to people who betray him." Miles looked at his bleeding hands. "He just tried to kill me. I think I understand what he does to people." "Then you understand why I'm scared." "Yeah, but I also understand that being scared isn't a good enough reason to let him win. You said it yourself, 17 people died. Your father needs to pay for that. And the only way he pays is if people like us are willing to stand up even when it's terrifying." Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Okay, tell Torres I'll meet with her, but it has to be somewhere secure, somewhere my father's people can't track. I'll let her know." Agent Chen was driving them through a part of the city Miles didn't recognize. Industrial buildings giving way to residential neighborhoods, then to something that looked almost suburban. They pulled up to a modest house with drawn curtains and a chain-link fence, and Chen finally spoke. "Safe house. You'll stay here until we can assess the threat level and figure out next steps." Miles followed him inside to find a space that was aggressively beige. Cheap furniture, bare walls, the kind of place that existed purely for function. There was a kitchen with a stocked pantry, a living room with a TV that probably only got basic channels, and 2 bedrooms that looked like they'd been furnished by someone who'd never actually lived in a home. "Make yourself comfortable," Chen said. "Agent Torres will be here shortly to brief you. In the meantime, there's a first aid kit in the bathroom. You should clean those cuts." Then he was gone, and Miles was alone in a safe house that felt anything but safe. He found the bathroom and ran water over his scraped palms, watching blood swirl down the drain while his mind tried to catch up to the fact that someone had tried to murder him 3 hours ago. His phone rang again. Mrs. Chen this time. "Miles, are you all right? It's all over the news. They're saying you were almost killed." "I'm okay, I'm somewhere safe. But Mrs. Chen, I need you to do me a favor. Anything. The FBI is going to send someone to pick up Sophie from school. Can you meet them there? Can you stay with her until I figure out what's happening? I don't want her to be scared." Of course I'll stay with her. Miles, what is going on? What have you gotten yourself into?" He told her everything. About the files, about Graham Cade, about the attempt on his life. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a prayer. "Your Sarah would be proud of you," she said finally, "and also very angry that you're risking your life. She always said you had more courage than sense." Miles felt tears prick his eyes. "I don't feel brave. I feel terrified." "That's what bravery is. Being terrified and doing it anyway." She paused. Sophie is going to be frightened when she hears what happened. What should I tell her? Tell her I'm safe. Tell her I love her. Tell her this is almost over and then we can go back to being normal. Will you? Go back to being normal? I don't know. I don't even know what normal looks like anymore. After he hung up, Miles sat on the uncomfortable couch and stared at the blank TV screen. His reflection looked back at him. Disheveled hair, scraped face, the expression of someone who'd just realized he was in way over his head. He thought about calling his manager at the warehouse to explain why he wouldn't be at work tonight. Then he remembered that his job was probably the least of his concerns right now. Agent Torres arrived an hour later with a tablet, a grim expression, and news that made Miles's stomach drop. We pulled the security footage, she said, settling into the chair across from him. The car was a black sedan, stolen 3 days ago from a long-term parking lot at the airport. The driver knew what they were doing. They kept their face angled away from cameras, wore gloves, dumped the car in a parking garage downtown. Professional work. So you can't trace it back to Cade. Not directly, but the timing is too convenient to be coincidental. You meet with us, and 6 hours later someone tries to run you down? That's not random. Can you arrest him? Not yet. Attempted murder requires proof of who ordered it, and right now all we have is suspicious timing, but it does give us leverage. If Graham Cade thinks we're investigating the hit and run as part of the larger case, he might make mistakes. Miles laughed bitterly. Great. So I'm bait. You're a witness under federal protection. There's a difference. Torres pulled up something on her tablet. I need to show you something. This went live about an hour ago. She turned the screen so Miles could see. It was a news conference. Graham Cade standing at a podium with microphones pointed at him like weapons, his expression perfectly calibrated to show concerned father with just a hint of righteous anger. My daughter Lena has been missing for 2 weeks, Cade was saying, his voice cracking in exactly the right places. We believe she may have been manipulated by individuals with an agenda against our company. We've learned that a man named Miles Hart, who briefly rented her a room, has been spreading false accusations about Cade Industries in an attempt to extort money from our family. We're offering a reward for anyone with information about Lena's whereabouts, and we're prepared to take legal action against Mr. Hart for harassment and defamation. The reporters erupted with questions, but Torres paused the video. He's getting ahead of the story. He's planting the narrative that you're an opportunist trying to shake down a grieving father. But the FBI is investigating. People will know. We can't comment on an ongoing investigation, which means for now, the only voice the public hears is his, and he's very good at controlling narratives. Miles felt sick. So even if we prove everything, even if we have all the evidence, people are going to think I made it up for money? Some people will. That's how character assassination works. You muddy the waters until no one knows what to believe, and then the truth becomes just another opinion. Torres closed the tablet. But that's also why we need Lena. She's his daughter. When she testifies against him, when she confirms everything you've said, it becomes a lot harder to dismiss as opportunism. She agreed to meet with you, but she wants security guarantees. She'll have them. I'm arranging a meeting for tomorrow morning. Neutral location, full protective detail. Can you contact her with the details? Miles nodded, already pulling out his phone. He texted Lena the information and got back an immediate response. I'll be there. How are you holding up? He typed back, your father just went on TV and called me an extortionist, so that's fun. He's trying to isolate you. Don't let him. The truth is going to come out. When? Because right now I'm in a safe house while he's on every news channel playing the victim. When we take him down in a way he can't spin, when the evidence is so overwhelming that no amount of PR can save him, trust the process, Miles. Trust that we're doing the right thing. Easy for her to say. She wasn't the one whose face was about to be plastered all over the internet as some kind of con artist, but Miles sent back, okay, see you tomorrow. That night, he tried to sleep in the unfamiliar bed, but mostly just stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle. At some point, his phone lit up with a call from a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, then figured the FBI had probably given his number to someone who needed to reach him. Hello? Mr. Hart, this is Rebecca Sutton. I saw the news conference. Are you all right? Define all right. Fair enough. Listen, I know this looks bad right now, but I'm working on my article. I've been verifying the documents, talking to environmental experts, reaching out to other potential victims. The story is almost ready to publish, and when it does, Graham Cade's press conference is going to look like the desperate move it is. How long until you publish? 3 days, maybe 4. I'm waiting for confirmation on a few details, and I want to time it so the FBI investigation is far enough along that Cade can't get an injunction to stop it. And what am I supposed to do in the meantime? Hide in this safe house while he destroys my reputation? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I know you're angry. I know you want to fight back. But the best thing you can do right now is stay alive and stay quiet. Let me tell the story. Let the evidence speak for itself. When people see what Cade Industries did, when they see the proof, they're going to realize who the real villain is. After they hung up, Miles paced the small living room and tried not to think about what people were saying about him online. He tried not to imagine Sophie seeing her father called a liar and a con artist on TV. He tried not to feel like he'd made a terrible mistake by thinking truth and justice actually mattered. The next morning, Agent Torres picked him up before dawn. Lena's meeting is in an hour. I thought you might want to be there. Really? I figured you'd want to interview her separately. Normally, yes, but she specifically asked if you'd be present, said it would make her feel safer. Torres glanced at him. You made an impression, Miles. She trusts you. They drove to a nondescript office building that Torres explained was a federal facility used for sensitive meetings. Inside, through multiple security checkpoints, into a conference room that had the same aggressively bland quality as the safe house. Lena was already there, looking thinner than Miles remembered, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing clothes that looked slept in. She stood when Miles entered, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two people who'd been thrown together by circumstance and were now bound by something neither of them had asked for. You look terrible, Lena said. You're one to talk. She smiled slightly, then crossed the room and hugged him. It surprised Miles, the sudden intimacy of it, the way she held on like he was something solid in a world that had gone liquid. He hugged her back, thinking about the scared girl who'd shown up at his door 2 weeks ago and the person she'd become under pressure. Okay, Torres said, sitting down at the conference table. Let's get started. Lena, I need you to tell me everything you know about Project Raven Lake. Start from the beginning. Lena sat and folded her hands on the table like she was preparing to confess. I found out about it by accident 6 months ago. I was using my father's computer. He lets me access it sometimes for school stuff, and I saw an email from his lawyer about RVL exposure mitigation. I thought it was some kind of business thing, but something about the tone made me suspicious. So I started digging. How did you access classified files? My father underestimates me. He thinks because I'm his daughter, because I'm young, I'm not capable of understanding his business. But I've been watching him my whole life. I know his passwords, I know how he organizes information, I know which files he considers important enough to encrypt. It wasn't that hard once I started looking. She pulled out a flash drive. Not the red one Miles had found, but a different one. This has everything. Not just the Raven Lake files, but communications between my father and his executives, legal documents outlining their cover-up strategy, financial records showing how they profited from the contaminated properties. It's 5 years of evidence. Torres took the drive carefully, like it might explode. Why didn't you go to the authorities immediately? Because I'm his daughter. Because I knew he'd discredit me, paint me as mentally unstable or rebellious, make it so no one would believe me. I needed time to build a case that couldn't be dismissed. I needed to find other victims, gather more proof, create something so undeniable that even my father's lawyers couldn't spin it. She looked at Miles, and then I found the victim list. 17 names. Sarah Hart was number 11. Miles felt his throat tighten. Why me? Why did you come to my apartment specifically? Because you were still fighting. Most of the other families had settled with NDAs or given up or moved away. But you were still here, still trying to get by, still being a father to your daughter. I hoped that if I showed you the truth, you might be willing to help me bring him down. You used me. Yes. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. I needed someone who had standing, who'd been directly harmed, who could be a credible witness. But Miles, I also... She stopped, collecting herself. I also saw what this had done to you and Sophie. I saw what my father's greed had destroyed, and I wanted to make it right. Torres cleared her throat. Let's focus on the evidence. Lena, are you prepared to testify against your father in court? Yes? You understand what that means? You'll be disowned. Your family will turn against you. Your father has the resources to make your life very difficult. He already tried to have Miles killed. I think I understand what I'm facing. And you're willing to proceed? Lena met Torres's gaze steadily. My father is a murderer. He killed 17 people for profit and tried to cover it up. If I stay silent, I'm complicit. So yes, Agent Torres, I'm willing to testify. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure he pays for what he did. The interview lasted 4 hours. Torres asked detailed questions about every file, every email, every piece of evidence on the flash drive. She asked about Graham Cade's business practices, his relationship with his legal team, his connections in government and law enforcement. She asked about Lena's mother, about family dynamics, about whether there were other relatives who might be involved. Lena answered everything with a precision that suggested she'd been preparing for this moment for months. She had dates memorized, names ready, details about conversations she'd overheard, and decisions she'd witnessed. She was building a case brick by brick, and Miles watched her transform from scared girl to determined witness. When they finally finished, Torres leaned back and released a long breath. This is good. This is really good. Between your testimony and the documentary evidence, we have enough to bring charges. Multiple charges. Manslaughter, conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice. We're talking about decades in prison if convicted. When will you arrest him? Miles asked. Soon. We need to coordinate with the prosecutor's office, prepare the warrants, make sure everything is airtight, but we're talking days, not weeks. Torres looked at both of them. I need you both to understand. Once we move, this becomes very public very quickly. Your names will be everywhere. You'll be under intense scrutiny. Graham Cade's lawyers will attack your credibility, your motives, your character. It's going to be brutal. I'm ready, Lena said. Miles? He thought about Sophie, about the life they'd been trying to build, about how everything was going to change the moment Graham Cade was arrested. Do it. Arrest him. Whatever comes after, we'll deal with it. Torres nodded. Okay, I'm putting you both under protective custody until the arrest happens. Lena, you'll stay at a secure facility. Miles, you'll remain at the safe house, and we'll arrange for your daughter to join you there. She's going to be terrified. She's going to be safe. That's what matters right now. They left the federal building separately. Lena with 2 agents headed to a location Torres wouldn't disclose. Miles back to the safe house with Agent Chen. On the way, Miles called Mrs. Chen to explain that Sophie would need to be picked up by federal agents and brought to stay with him for a few days. Is this ever going to end? Mrs. Chen asked quietly. Yeah, it's almost over, just a few more days. And then what? You think life goes back to normal after all this? I don't know what happens then, but at least Sarah's death will mean something. At least Graham Cade will be in prison where he belongs. Be careful, Miles. Men like that don't go down without taking people with them. She was right, of course. When Sophie arrived at the safe house 3 hours later, confused and scared and clutching Mr. Hopscotch, Miles knew they'd crossed into territory where there was no turning back. His daughter was in FBI protective custody because a billionaire wanted them dead. That was their reality now. Daddy, what's happening? Sophie asked as he hugged her. Mrs. Chen said we had to stay here for a while. She said it wasn't safe at home. It's not safe right now, Bug, but it will be soon, I promise. Because of Lena's dad? Yeah, because of him. Sophie pulled back to look at him seriously. Are you going to put him in jail? I'm going to try. Good. She squeezed Mr. Hopscotch tighter. He hurt Mom. He should be in jail. Miles set her up in the second bedroom with the few toys and books the agents had grabbed from their apartment. He made dinner from the stocked pantry, pasta again, because apparently that's all he knew how to cook under stress. They ate in front of the TV, watching cartoons that Sophie had seen 100 times, pretending this was normal. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Miles sat in the dark living room and thought about what came next. The arrest, the trial, the media circus, the aftermath of destroying a billionaire's life and empire. He He thought about whether justice was worth the cost, whether Sarah would be proud or horrified, whether he was being brave or just reckless. His phone buzzed. Rebecca Sutton. I'm publishing tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. The story is going to break on the Tribune's website and then get picked up nationally. I wanted you to know before it happens. What's the headline? Empire of Poison, How Cade Industries Murdered 17 People for Profit. I'm leading with Sarah's story, single mother, working at the library, dreams of a future with her new husband. I'm making this human, not just corporate. People need to understand who Graham Cade destroyed. Miles felt tears prick his eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly. Cade's people are already threatening legal action, and I've gotten 3 calls today from people claiming to have information that discredits you. They're scared, Miles, which means we're winning. After she hung up, Miles allowed himself to feel something that might have been hope. Tomorrow, the world would know the truth. Tomorrow, Graham Cade's carefully constructed empire would start to crumble. Tomorrow, Sarah's death would finally matter in a way that transcended grief. He checked on Sophie one more time, still sleeping peacefully, Mr. Hopscotch tucked under her chin, and then went to bed in the safe house that would be home until this was over. At 5:30 a.m., his phone started ringing. By 6, it hadn't stopped. Reporters, old friends, people he barely knew, all calling because Rebecca's story had gone live, and suddenly Miles' heart wasn't just some warehouse worker anymore. He was the widower at the center of a national scandal. He was the man who'd exposed a billionaire. He was either a hero or a con artist, depending on who you asked. Agent Torres called at 6:15. Graham Cade is in custody. We executed the warrant an hour ago. He's being processed now, and he'll be arraigned this afternoon. Miles, you did it. You actually did it. Miles sat on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to his ear, trying to process the words. Graham Cade. In custody. Arrested. Actually arrested. What about his lawyers? They're already working on bail, but the charges are serious enough that we're going to fight to keep him detained. Either way, this is happening. The case is moving forward. Sophie appeared in his doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Daddy, why are you crying? He hadn't realized he was. Miles wiped his face and pulled his daughter into his lap. I'm crying because we won, Bug. The bad man who hurt Mom is going to jail. Really? Really? She hugged him so tight it hurt, and Miles held her while Agent Torres continued talking about legal procedures and next steps and witness protection protocols. But all Miles could think about was Sarah, about how she'd never see this moment, never know that the people responsible for her death were finally being held accountable, about how justice couldn't bring her back, but maybe, just maybe, it could help her family move forward. The news broke everywhere simultaneously. Graham Cade's arrest became the lead story on every channel, every website, every social media platform. Photos of him in handcuffs being walked into the federal courthouse. Headlines screaming about corporate murder and billionaire corruption. Rebecca's article being shared thousands of times with people expressing outrage and demanding accountability. And in the middle of it all, Miles Hart's name. The widower who'd fought back. The single father who'd risked everything. The man who'd taken down an empire with nothing but truth and determination. By noon, Miles's phone had 300 missed calls and more texts than he could count. Some supportive, some accusing him of opportunism, some threatening. Agent Torres had to change his number and issue a statement through the FBI that Miles would not be giving interviews or making public statements while the case was ongoing. Lena called from her secure location. Have you seen the news? Hard to miss it. My father's lawyers are already spinning this as a witch hunt. They're saying he's being persecuted because he's successful, that you and I are collaborating to destroy him for money. Are you okay? She laughed, but it sounded broken. My entire family has disowned me. My mother won't take my calls. My cousins are posting on social media about what a traitor I am. So no, Miles, I'm not okay. But I'm alive. And my father is in jail, and that has to count for something. It counts for everything. Does it? Because right now it feels like we've just made everything worse, like we've destroyed our lives for a chance at justice that might not even happen. Miles looked at Sophie, who was coloring at the kitchen table with supplies Agent Chen had bought. We did the right thing. Even if it costs us everything, we did the right thing. That has to matter. I hope you're right. The arraignment happened that afternoon. Miles watched it on TV from the safe house. Graham Cade in an expensive suit, looking calm and confident, pleading not guilty to all charges, while his team of lawyers argued for bail. The judge, clearly unimpressed, set bail at $20 million and imposed strict conditions including surrender of passport and electronic monitoring. Cade posted bail within an hour. Of course he did, Miles muttered at the TV. $20 million is probably what he spends on vacation. Agent Torres called immediately. He's out, but he's being monitored. He can't leave the state, and he can't contact you, Lena, or any potential witnesses. If he violates those conditions, he goes straight back to jail. So he's just free after everything? He's free until trial. That's how the system works. But Miles, we're building an airtight case. The evidence is overwhelming. When this goes to trial, he's going down. When is the trial? 6 months? Maybe 8. Federal cases take time. 6 months. Half a year of living in limbo, of watching Graham Cade walk around free while Sarah stayed dead. Miles felt rage bubble up in his chest, hot and acidic. I want to testify, he said. When it goes to trial, I want to be on that stand. I want to look him in the eye and tell the jury what he took from me. You will. You and Lena both. You're key witnesses. That night, Miles lay in bed thinking about the trial. About sitting in a courtroom while lawyers picked apart his life and his marriage and his grief. About Graham Cade's legal team trying to prove he was an opportunist or unstable or lying. About having to relive Sarah's death in excruciating detail for a jury of strangers. But he also thought about those 17 names. About families who'd never gotten justice. About people who'd trusted corporations and been betrayed. About a system that protected the rich and powerful until someone finally said enough. Sophie's door opened, and she padded into his room in her pajamas. Daddy, I can't sleep. Me neither, Bug. He lifted the covers, and she crawled in beside him, warm and small and trusting. Are we safe now that the bad man got arrested? Miles wanted to lie, wanted to tell her everything was fine, but Sophie deserved honesty. We're safer, but we have to stay here a little longer just to be sure the FBI is protecting us. And then we can go home. And then we can go home. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Daddy, do you think Mom knows about what you did? Miles felt his throat close. Yeah, Bug. I think she knows. And I think she's proud. I'm proud too. Sophie yawned and snuggled closer. You're brave. So are you. They fell asleep like that, father and daughter in an FBI safe house, hiding from a billionaire's revenge, waiting for a trial that would either vindicate them or destroy them. But for tonight, they were together and safe, and that had to be enough. Because tomorrow, the real fight would begin. Morning came too early, filtering through the safe house curtains like an unwelcome reminder that the world kept turning, whether Miles was ready or not. Sophie was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her coloring book, and Miles realized she'd probably been up for hours. Kids always knew when something big was coming, even if the adults tried to hide it. Good morning, Bug, he said, pouring himself coffee from the pot Agent Chen had started before his shift ended. Is today the day we can go home? Miles wished he could say yes. They'd been in the safe house for 4 days now, and Sophie was starting to show the strain. Nightmares, clinginess, the kind of anxiety that made his chest hurt because 8-year-olds shouldn't have to worry about billionaires and death threats. Not yet, but soon. His phone rang before Sophie could protest. Agent Torres. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Graham Cade's legal team filed a motion to dismiss all charges. They're claiming the evidence was obtained illegally through Lena's theft of proprietary information, and that you and she conspired to extort money from Cade Industries. Miles felt ice slide down his spine. Can they do that? Just dismiss everything? They can try. The judge will hear arguments next week. But Miles, this is what I warned you about. They're going to fight this with everything they have. We need to be prepared for a long battle. What about the contamination? The people who died? The cover-up? All of that is still valid evidence. But if the judge rules that the initial files were obtained illegally, it could create problems for the prosecution. We're working on independent verification of the contamination through our own environmental testing, but that takes time. After Torres hung up, Miles sat at the kitchen table across from his daughter and tried to find words to explain that justice wasn't as simple as arresting the bad guy and watching him go to jail. That sometimes the system protected people with money and power even when everyone knew they were guilty. That doing the right thing didn't guarantee the right outcome. "Daddy, you look sad," Sophie observed. "I'm just tired, Bug." Are they going to let the bad man go? Sometimes her perceptiveness was terrifying. They're trying, but we're not going to let that happen. The next few days crawled by in a blur of legal updates and media coverage that swung wildly between supporting Miles as a hero and condemning him as an opportunist. Graham Cade gave another press conference, this time flanked by lawyers who spoke about presumption of innocence and prosecutorial overreach, and how this was really about a disturbed young woman and a desperate man trying to profit from tragedy. Lena called every night from her own secure location, her voice getting smaller and more defeated with each conversation. "They're winning the narrative," she said on the fifth night. "Every article I read, every comment section, people are starting to believe we made this up. That I'm some spoiled girl with daddy issues and you're some deadbeat looking for a payout. The truth is going to come out in court. Will it? Because right now it feels like the truth doesn't matter as much as who has better lawyers." Miles didn't have a good answer for that. He'd grown up believing that America had a justice system that worked, that truth prevailed, that good people got vindicated. But watching Graham Cade smile for cameras while his legal team systematically dismantled the case was teaching him a different lesson, that justice was expensive, and people who couldn't afford it usually didn't get it. Rebecca Sutton published a follow-up article 3 days before the dismissal hearing, this time focusing on the other victims. She'd tracked down families who'd settled with NDAs, found medical records that corroborated the contamination claims, interviewed environmental experts who confirmed the water supply had been poisoned. It was damning, thorough, the kind of journalism that should have made the case undeniable. Graham Cade's lawyers called it trial by media and accused Rebecca of being biased. The dismissal hearing happened on a Tuesday morning in federal court. Miles wasn't allowed to attend, witnesses couldn't be present for preliminary motions, so he watched the live feed from the safe house while Sophie was at school with a protective detail. He watched Graham Cade's lawyers argue that Lena had stolen the files in violation of corporate policy, that the evidence was fruit of the poisonous tree, that the whole case was built on illegal activity and should be thrown out. He watched the prosecutor counter that whistleblower protections applied, that evidence of ongoing criminal activity couldn't be suppressed just because it was obtained unconventionally, that 17 people were dead and justice demanded accountability. And he watched the judge, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that gave nothing away, take it all under advisement and say she'd rule within 48 hours. 2 days. 2 days to find out if everything they'd sacrificed meant anything at all. Miles picked up Sophie from school and took her to get ice cream at a shop 3 blocks from the safe house, trying to give her something normal in the middle of the chaos. She ordered chocolate chip and ate it slowly while Miles pretended his vanilla cone wasn't melting all over his hand because he couldn't focus on anything except the judge's decision. "Daddy," Sophie said around a mouthful of ice cream, "if the judge says the bad man can go free, does that mean he wins? It means we have to find another way to make sure he pays for what he did." "But you said the truth matters. You said doing the right thing matters." Miles looked at his daughter, this small person who still believed the world was fair, who trusted that her father could fix things, who hadn't yet learned that sometimes the villains won simply because they had more money and better lawyers. "It does matter, Bug. Even if we don't win, even if the case gets dismissed, we told the truth. We exposed what he did. People know now. That counts for something." Does it? It was the same question Lena had asked, and Miles still didn't have a good answer. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Miles sat in the dark living room and thought about what happened if they lost. If Graham Cade walked away from this, charges dismissed, reputation damaged, but not destroyed. Would there be civil suits? Could the victims' families sue Cade Industries even if the criminal case failed? Or would NDAs and legal maneuvering protect the company while Miles and Lena were left broke and discredited? His phone rang at 11 p.m., Lena crying so hard he could barely understand her. They found my apartment, she gasped. My father's people. They broke in and trashed everything. The agents got there in time to stop them. But Lena, they left a message on the wall. Traitors get what they deserve. Miles, I'm so scared. What if the judge dismisses the case and my father comes after me? What if he... Where are you now? Being moved to a new location. But it doesn't matter. He has people everywhere. He's never going to stop until I'm either dead or completely destroyed. Lena, listen to me. We're going to get through this. Even if the case gets dismissed, we'll find another way. There is no other way. Her voice cracked. I gave up everything for this. My family, my future, everything I had. And for what? So my father could hire better lawyers and make it all go away while I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder? Miles didn't know what to say. He'd been so focused on the rightness of their cause that he hadn't fully considered what failure would mean, not just for him and Sophie, but for Lena, who'd betrayed her own father and could never go back. I'm sorry, he said finally. I'm so sorry this is happening. Me too. She hung up, and Miles sat alone in the darkness, wondering if courage and truth were enough when the other side had infinite resources and no conscience. The judge's ruling came down at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning. Agent Torres called before Miles could even read the news. We won. The judge denied the motion to dismiss. She ruled that whistleblower protections apply and that evidence of ongoing criminal activity is admissible regardless of how it was obtained. The case is moving forward. Miles felt something in his chest unclench for the first time in weeks. We're actually going to trial? We're going to trial. Opening statements are scheduled for 3 months from now, which means we have 3 months to prepare you and Lena to testify, to shore up our evidence, to build a case that a jury can't ignore. 3 months. It felt like forever and no time at all. That evening, Miles and Sophie were finally cleared to return to their apartment building. The SUVs were gone. The threats had quieted after the judge's ruling, as if Graham Cade's people had realized that overt intimidation was now evidence of obstruction. Agent Torres arranged for periodic patrols of the building, gave Miles a direct line to call if anything felt wrong, and promised that protective services would continue through the trial. Sophie ran into their apartment like she was returning from exile, immediately going to her room to check if her toys were still where she'd left them. Miles stood in the living room that felt both familiar and strange, looking at the kitchen table Lena had fixed, at the drawings on the refrigerator, at all the pieces of a life that had been shattered and was now slowly being reconstructed. Mrs. Chen appeared at his door within 5 minutes, carrying a casserole dish. Welcome home. You look like you haven't eaten real food in weeks. I haven't. Thank you. He took the dish, feeling grateful for neighbors who didn't ask too many questions but showed up anyway. The whole building has been following the news, Mrs. Chen said. Some people think you're brave, others think you're foolish, but everyone agrees you've got courage. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified that this is all going to blow up in my face. Courage and terror are the same thing wearing different clothes. She patted his arm. You're doing the right thing, Miles. Sarah would be proud. The next 3 months were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Agent Torres and the prosecution team prepared Miles and Lena for testimony. Hours of practice questions, mock cross-examinations, lessons in how to stay calm when lawyers tried to rattle them. They went over every detail of the evidence, every email and report and data point, until Miles could recite contamination levels and mortality rates in his sleep. Rebecca continued publishing follow-up articles as new information emerged. Environmental tests confirmed the contamination. More victims came forward, emboldened by the case actually making it to trial. Former Cade Industries employees broke their NDAs to testify about the cover-up, accepting the legal risk because they couldn't stay silent anymore. And Graham Cade's legal team fought back with everything they had: character witnesses who swore he was a pillar of the community, expert witnesses who questioned the contamination data, PR campaigns that painted him as a businessman being persecuted by an ungrateful daughter and an opportunistic widower. The media coverage was relentless. Miles's face was everywhere, on news sites, social media, even a few magazine covers. The man who challenged an empire. Single father versus billionaire. The coverage swung between lionizing him as a hero and investigating every mistake he'd ever made to prove he was just looking for money. Sophie handled it better than Miles expected, though she had nightmares and started seeing the school counselor twice a week. She drew pictures of courtrooms and justice, and her mother watching from heaven. She asked questions Miles didn't know how to answer about why bad people sometimes got away with bad things, and whether money was more powerful than truth. Lena remained in protective custody, moving between safe locations, her former life completely dismantled. Her mother released a statement disowning her. Her father's lawyers tried to have her declared mentally incompetent. Social media alternately vilified her as a spoiled traitor or praised her as a courageous whistleblower. "Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it," she told Miles during one of their nightly calls 2 weeks before trial. "I've lost everything, my family, my name, any chance at a normal life. What if we go through all this and he still walks free? Then at least we tried. That has to mean something." Does it? Miles thought about Sarah, about 17 names on a list, about all the people who'd been hurt by corporate greed and never gotten justice. Yeah, it does. Because even if the jury acquits him, even if he walks out of that courtroom a free man, the world knows what he did. The truth is out there now. That's worth something. The trial began on a Monday morning in January, almost 4 months after Graham Cade's arrest. The courthouse was surrounded by news vans and protesters, some supporting the victims, others defending Cade as a job creator being destroyed by false accusations. Miles walked through a gauntlet of cameras and questions, Sophie beside him holding his hand tight, both of them flanked by federal agents. Inside, the courtroom was all dark wood and American flags and the weight of institutional authority. Graham Cade sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking calm and righteous, like a man being wrongly persecuted. His legal team, 4 lawyers who probably cost more per hour than Miles made in a month, projected confidence. The prosecutor was a woman named Jennifer Walsh, mid-40s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made you nervous to lie in her presence. She'd spent weeks preparing for this, and Miles watched her organize her notes with the precision of someone who didn't leave things to chance. Jury selection took 2 days. Opening statements started on Wednesday. Walsh stood before the jury and painted a picture of corporate greed so callous it bordered on cartoonish, except it was real. She talked about Raven Lake, about contaminated water, about families who'd trusted that the water in their homes was safe. She talked about 17 people who'd died, showing their photos on a screen while family members wept in the gallery. She talked about Graham Cade knowingly, deliberately, systematically covering up evidence to protect his profits and his reputation. Then Cade's lead attorney stood up and painted a different picture of a successful businessman targeted by an unstable daughter and a desperate widower looking for someone to blame for life's tragedies. He talked about how grief could make people see conspiracies where there were only accidents, how mental illness could manifest as false accusations, how the real victim here was a father whose daughter had betrayed him and a company being destroyed by unfounded allegations. Miles sat in the gallery with Sophie and Mrs. Chen and watched the jury's faces, trying to read which narrative they were buying. The prosecution's case took 3 weeks. Environmental experts testified about the contamination. Medical experts linked the deaths to chemical exposure. Former Cade Industries employees described the deliberate cover-up, the orders to suppress reports, the intimidation of anyone who questioned company policy. Rebecca Sutton testified about her investigation and the patterns she'd uncovered, and then it was Miles's turn. He walked to the witness stand on a Thursday morning, raised his right hand, and swore to tell the truth. Walsh approached with a kind expression that was probably meant to be reassuring, but mostly just reminded Miles that he was about to have his entire life examined by strangers. "Mr. Hart, can you tell the jury about your wife, Sarah?" Miles took a breath. She was the best person I ever knew. Kind, funny, patient. She loved books and terrible puns and our daughter more than anything in the world. She worked at the library because she believed everyone deserved access to stories, to knowledge, to hope. When did she die? About 1.5 years ago. She had a heart attack. The doctors said it was cardiomyopathy. Her heart just gave out. She was 32. Did they give you any indication of what might have caused such a young woman to develop a fatal heart condition? They said sometimes it just happens, that there's no explanation. that we should be grateful she didn't suffer long. But you later learned there was an explanation, didn't you? Miles looked at Graham Cade, who sat stone-faced at the defense table. Yes, I learned that my wife had been poisoned, that she'd lived in a house near Raven Lake that had contaminated water, and that over time the chemicals in that water destroyed her heart. I learned that it wasn't bad luck or genetics or random chance. It was murder. The defense attorney objected, inflammatory language, but the judge allowed it with a warning to stick to facts. Walsh walked Miles through everything, meeting Lena, finding the USB drive, the contents of the files, the list of victims with Sarah's name, the confrontations with Voss, the attempt on his life. Every detail laid out for the jury to examine. Then came cross-examination. Cade's attorney was a man named Robert Thornton, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, who approached Miles like a predator approaching wounded prey. Mr. Hart, how much money have you made from this case? None. None? But surely you're planning to file a civil suit against Cade Industries, seeking damages for your wife's death? I haven't decided yet. But it's crossed your mind, the possibility of a large settlement? What's crossed my mind is that my wife was murdered and the person responsible should be held accountable. Thornton smiled thinly. Noble words. Let's talk about your financial situation before all this began. You were struggling, weren't you? Behind on bills, barely making ends meet? I'm a single father working 2 jobs. Yeah, money was tight. Tight enough that $400 a month in rent from a mysterious tenant seemed too good to be true? I needed the income. That's not a crime. No, but it does establish a motive. A desperate man sees an opportunity. A young woman with access to her father's company, files that could be twisted to support a false narrative, a chance at a payout that would solve all his problems. Miles felt anger rise in his chest. My wife died. That's not a false narrative. That's my reality. Your wife died of heart disease, tragic, but not necessarily criminal. Isn't it possible you've convinced yourself of a conspiracy because the alternative, that sometimes bad things just happen, is too difficult to accept? No, because I've seen the evidence. I've read the reports. I know what Cade Industries did. Evidence provided by Lena Cade, a young woman with documented mental health issues and a troubled relationship with her father. Evidence that was stolen, I might add. The evidence is real whether she stole it or not. Thornton went on for another hour, picking at Miles' credibility, his finances, his relationship with Lena, every possible angle to make the jury doubt his testimony. By the time Miles stepped down, he felt like he'd been flayed alive. Lena testified the next day. She walked to the stand looking smaller than Miles remembered, but her voice was steady as she swore the oath. Walsh took her through the evidence methodically, how she'd found the files, what they contained, why she'd chosen to expose her father rather than protect him. I watched my father build an empire by treating people as disposable, Lena said. I watched him lie and manipulate and destroy anyone who got in his way, and I told myself it was just business, that this was how successful people operated. But then I saw the victim list. I saw Sarah Hart's name, and I realized these weren't just numbers in a spreadsheet. These were people. Real people with families and dreams and futures that my father had stolen for profit. And I couldn't stay silent anymore. Walsh asked the question that everyone wanted answered. Why did you go to Miles Hart specifically? Because he was still fighting. Most of the other families had been paid off or scared off or just worn down by grief. But Miles was still there, still trying to take care of his daughter, still looking for answers. I hoped, that if I showed him the truth, he'd be willing to help me expose it. I needed someone who had standing, who'd been directly harmed, who could be a credible witness. But I also, her voice broke. I also wanted to make it right. I wanted to give him justice for what my father had done to his family. Then came Thornton's cross-examination, and it was brutal. He went after her mental health history, the therapist she'd seen as a teenager, the anxiety medication, the depression that had followed her mother's emotional abuse. He painted her as unstable, as someone with a grudge against her father, as a girl who'd manufactured a conspiracy to justify her own feelings of inadequacy. Isn't it true, Ms. Cade, that you've always resented your father's success? That you've never felt you measured up to his expectations? I resented that he valued money over human life, Lena shot back. That's not the same thing. But you have a history of seeing him as the villain in your story, don't you? Your therapist's notes indicate you blamed him for your mother's unhappiness, for your own struggles, for essentially every problem in your life. Because he caused those problems, he was emotionally abusive to both of us. He made our lives hell whenever we didn't perform according to his standards. Yes, I blamed him, because he was to blame. Or because it was easier than accepting responsibility for your own issues? Walsh objected, and the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. Thornton had planted doubt, not about the facts, but about Lena's motivations for exposing them. The defense's case lasted a week. They brought in character witnesses who swore Graham Cade was generous and ethical. They brought in their own experts who questioned the environmental data and suggested alternative explanations for the deaths. They painted a picture of a successful businessman being destroyed by a vindictive daughter and a grieving widower who'd latched onto a conspiracy theory. And through it all, Graham Cade sat at the defense table projecting wounded innocence, like he couldn't understand why anyone would believe such terrible things about him. Closing arguments happened on a Friday morning. Walsh summarized the evidence with precision, building a case brick by brick. Contamination data, mortality records, internal memos proving knowledge and cover-up, witness testimony establishing a pattern of corporate malfeasance. She ended by asking the jury to think about Sarah Hart, about the other 16 victims, about all the families who'd lost someone because a billionaire had decided profit mattered more than human life. Thornton's closing argument was equally compelling. He talked about reasonable doubt, about how the prosecution hadn't definitively proved that Graham Cade had personally ordered the cover-up. He talked about how tragic deaths didn't necessarily mean criminal activity, how sometimes correlation wasn't causation, how a father's love for his missing daughter didn't make him a murderer. The jury began deliberations on Monday morning. Miles took Sophie back to their apartment to wait, because there was nothing else to do. Agent Torres had warned him it could take days or even weeks for a verdict in a case this complex. So he waited, and tried not to lose his mind. 3 days passed, then 4, then 5. On the 6th day, Miles's phone rang at 9 p.m. Torres. "We have a verdict. The jury's coming back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Miles barely slept that night. He lay in bed thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Sarah's death, Lena's courage, his own decision to fight back instead of staying silent. He thought about what it would mean if they lost, if Graham Cade walked out of that courtroom a free man. And he thought about what it would mean if they won, if justice actually prevailed for once. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Miles sat in the gallery with Sophie on one side and Mrs. Chen on the other, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Lena sat with the prosecution team, looking pale and terrified. Graham Cade sat at the defense table looking confident, like this was already decided in his favor. The jury filed in, and Miles tried to read their faces but couldn't see anything definitive. The foreperson, a middle-aged black woman who'd been taking copious notes throughout the trial, stood when the judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." The word hit the courtroom like a bomb. Graham Cade's confident expression cracked. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. "On the charge of reckless endangerment resulting in death?" "Guilty." "On the charge of obstruction of justice?" "Guilty." The judge went through all 17 counts, one for each death, and the jury found Graham Cade guilty on every single one. Miles felt tears streaming down his face, felt Sophie squeeze his hand so tight it hurt, felt Mrs. Chen patting his shoulder while she cried too. Guilty. On all counts. Guilty. Graham Cade stood staring at the jury like he couldn't process what was happening. His lawyers were already talking about appeals, about errors in the proceedings, but the judge was setting a sentencing date and remanding Cade into custody pending that hearing. Federal marshals approached the defense table. Graham Cade, billionaire, CEO, man who'd thought himself untouchable, was handcuffed and led out of the courtroom while cameras flashed and people cheered and his lawyers protested that this was a miscarriage of justice. But it wasn't. For once, the system had actually worked. For once, money and power hadn't been enough to escape accountability. For once, the truth had mattered more than the narrative. Outside the courthouse, Miles stood on the steps with Sophie and Lena while reporters shouted questions. Agent Torres had arranged for a brief statement, and Walsh stood at the microphone first. Today, justice was served. Graham Cade was held accountable for his actions, and 17 families finally have closure. This verdict sends a message that no one is above the law, regardless of wealth or power. Then she stepped aside and nodded to Miles. He approached the microphone with Sophie still clutching his hand. "My wife Sarah deserved to live a long life," Miles said, his voice shaking. "She deserved to watch our daughter grow up. She deserved all the things that were stolen from her by corporate greed and criminal negligence. This verdict doesn't bring her back, but it means her death mattered. It means all 17 victims mattered. And it means that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, courage and truth are enough to overcome money and power." He stepped back and Lena took his place at the microphone. She looked directly at the cameras, directly at her father, who was probably watching from a holding cell. "I hope someday you understand why I did this," she said quietly. "I hope you understand that loving you meant I couldn't protect you from the consequences of your choices. I hope you use your time in prison to think about the lives you destroyed and the families you broke. And I hope that someday you'll realize that the only person who betrayed our family was you." Sentencing happened 6 weeks later. Miles sat in the same courtroom and watched Graham Cade receive 17 concurrent life sentences, one for each person who died because of his decisions. The judge was unsparing in her remarks, talking about how Cade had abused his power, violated the public trust, and shown no remorse for his actions. "You valued profit over human life," the judge said. "You treated people as disposable, as acceptable casualties in your pursuit of wealth. And you did it all while hiding behind corporate structure and legal maneuvering, believing yourself untouchable. Today's sentence is a message that no one is untouchable, and that justice, however delayed, will eventually prevail." Graham Cade was led away in shackles, and Miles felt something in his chest finally release. It was over. Actually, truly over. The civil suits came next, families of the victims filing wrongful death claims against Cade Industries. Miles was offered a settlement of $3 million, enough to pay off debts, buy a house, send Sophie to college, live comfortably for the rest of his life. He accepted it not because he wanted the money, but because Sophie deserved stability and Sarah's death deserved to mean something tangible for their daughter's future. Lena received nothing. She'd been written out of her father's will the moment she testified against him, and Cade Industries' board distanced themselves from her to protect the company's reputation. But she was free, finally, truly free, of the family that had defined and confined her for 20 years. She got a job at a nonprofit that helped whistleblowers navigate the legal and emotional aftermath of speaking truth to power. She moved into a small apartment across town, started therapy, began rebuilding a life that was entirely her own. And once a week she came to Miles and Sophie's new apartment for dinner. It was 6 months after the sentencing, and they were eating spaghetti, still the only thing Miles really knew how to cook, when Sophie pulled out a wooden box she'd been working on in art class. "I made something," she announced, "for all of us." She opened the box to reveal 3 objects arranged carefully on felt lining. A small wooden key that she'd carved in woodshop, the word home burned into it with a wood-burning tool. The original rental receipt Miles had written for Lena's first month's rent, now laminated and preserved. And a paper crane folded from a newspaper clipping, the headline announcing Graham Cade's conviction. "These are the 3 most important things," Sophie explained. "The key means we found home even when everything was scary. The receipt means Lena found us, and we found her. And the crane means we won. We beat the bad guy." Lena picked up the crane carefully, tears streaming down her face. "Sophie, this is beautiful." "Mom used to fold cranes," Sophie said. "Daddy told me. So I learned how, and I wanted to make one that meant something good happened because of what she went through." Miles pulled his daughter into a hug, overwhelmed by her wisdom and resilience. "Your mom would love this, Bug. She'd be so proud of you." "I'm proud of all of us," Sophie said. "We were brave together." Later that night, after Lena had gone home and Sophie was asleep, Miles sat on his couch in their new apartment. 2 bedrooms, better heat, a neighborhood where kids played outside without supervision, and thought about everything that had happened, about Sarah and Justice and the strange family he'd built from tragedy and courage. His phone buzzed with a text from Lena. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for believing that truth mattered. Thank you for being the kind of person who fights even when the odds are impossible." He typed back, "Thank you for risking everything to make this right." Sarah's death will always hurt, but at least it means something now. At least 17 families got justice. That's because of you. A year later, Miles stood in a courtroom again, but this time it was different. This time, he wasn't a witness or a victim. He was a spectator watching Lena receive an award from a national whistleblower protection organization. She stood at a podium in front of judges and activists and other people who'd spoken truth to power, and she told their story. "I didn't do this alone," Lena said. "I couldn't have done it alone. It took a single father who refused to accept that his wife's death was just bad luck. It took an FBI agent who believed us when she had every reason not to. It took a journalist who wouldn't back down even when threatened. It took a community of people who decided that sometimes justice is worth fighting for, even when the cost is everything." She held up the paper crane Sophie had folded, now encased in clear resin on a stand. This crane was made by an 8-year-old girl who lost her mother to corporate greed. She folded it from the newspaper headline announcing her mother's murderer had been convicted. And she told me it represented hope. The hope that even the smallest, most powerless people can change the world if they're brave enough to try. Miles watched from the audience with Sophie beside him, his daughter beaming with pride because her crane, her symbol of their shared courage, was being honored in front of hundreds of people. After the ceremony, they went to dinner at a restaurant that was nicer than anywhere Miles had eaten in years. The settlement money meant he didn't have to worry about prices anymore, didn't have to calculate whether they could afford dessert. Sophie ordered everything she wanted, and Lena laughed at her stories about school, and for a few hours they were just people sharing a meal instead of survivors of corporate warfare. Walking back to their cars, Lena pulled Miles aside. "I need to tell you something. I've been offered a job in D.C., working with a senator who's drafting corporate accountability legislation. They want someone who understands whistleblower issues from personal experience." Miles felt a pang of something that might have been loss. "That's amazing, Lena. You should absolutely take it. It means I'll be moving away. I won't be able to come to dinner every week. You'll visit, though, and we'll visit you. Sophie's already planning a trip to see the monuments." Lena hugged him tight. "You gave me a family when mine fell apart. You gave me a reason to keep fighting when I wanted to give up. I'll never forget that." "You gave my wife's death meaning," Miles replied. "You turned tragedy into justice. That's a gift I can never repay." 6 months after that, Miles stood in front of a different kind of audience. He'd been invited to speak at a conference on corporate accountability, to tell his story to lawyers and activists and policymakers who were trying to strengthen whistleblower protections and environmental regulations. He stood at the podium looking at hundreds of faces and thought about where he'd been 2 years ago. Broke, grieving, working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. And he thought about where he was now, comfortable, healing, using his experience to help others understand why this work mattered. "The smallest room my family ever rented," Miles began, "ended up being the place where we found the courage to bring down an empire. A 20-year-old girl knocked on my door looking for a safe place to hide, and what she gave me in return was truth. The truth about why my wife died. The truth about corporate crime that had been hidden for years. The truth that sometimes regular people can stand up to the powerful and actually win." He talked about Sarah, about the 17 victims, about the long road from suspicion to evidence to conviction. He talked about the costs, the fear, the intimidation, the constant uncertainty, but he also talked about the rewards that had nothing to do with money. "My daughter knows what her mother died for now," Miles said. "She knows that Sarah's death wasn't random or meaningless. She knows that we fought back and won, and she's growing up understanding that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's being terrified and doing the right thing anyway." In the front row, Sophie sat between Mrs. Chen and Agent Torres, who'd become something like an extended family over the past 2 years. Sophie was holding the wooden box she'd made, the one with the key and the receipt and the paper crane. And when Miles finished speaking, she held it up like a trophy, like proof that small people could make big changes. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, a young woman approached Miles nervously. "Mr. Hart, I work for a company that I think is covering up environmental contamination. I've been collecting evidence, but I'm terrified of what will happen if I come forward. How did you find the courage? Miles thought about that question, about the morning he'd found the red USB drive, about the decision to keep fighting when it would have been easier to walk away, about Sarah and Sophie and Lena and all the people who'd been harmed by corporate greed. I didn't find courage, he said honestly. Courage found me when I had no other choice, when staying silent felt worse than speaking up, when I realized that protecting my daughter meant teaching her that some things are worth fighting for even when you're scared. He paused. But you don't have to do it alone. Find allies, document everything, and remember that the truth is powerful even when it feels like you're powerless. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked away clutching a business card for Lena's nonprofit. That night, Miles tucked Sophie into bed in their safe, warm apartment. She'd grown 3 inches in the past year. Her hair was finally long enough for the braid she'd wanted, and she was reading chapter books that Sarah would have loved. "Daddy?" she asked as he pulled the covers up. "Do you think Mom knows we won?" "Yeah, Bug. I think she knows. And she's proud?" "She's incredibly proud. Of both of us." Sophie hugged Mr. Hopscotch close. "I'm going to be brave like you when I grow up. I'm going to fight bad guys and make sure people get justice." Miles kissed her forehead. "You're already brave, Sophie. You've been brave since the day you were born." After she fell asleep, Miles walked to his own room and opened the drawer where he kept Sarah's things, her wedding ring, photos, a note she'd written him years ago that said, "You're my favorite person in the whole world." He'd read it so many times the paper was wearing thin at the folds. "We did it," he whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of his wife who he'd loved and lost and avenged. "Graham Cade is in prison. The victims got justice. Lena is safe and building a life. Sophie is healing. We actually did it." The room didn't answer, but Miles felt something settle in his chest. Not closure exactly, because grief didn't work that way, but peace. The knowledge that he'd honored Sarah's memory not with flowers or tears, but with action. That her death had sparked a chain of events that brought down a corrupt empire and changed laws and gave other victims the courage to speak up. That was legacy. That was meaning. That was love transformed into justice. Miles turned off the light and went to bed in the apartment he could afford, in the life he'd rebuilt from ruins, in the knowledge that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the good guys actually won. And tomorrow he'd wake up and make breakfast for his daughter and probably call Lena to check in and keep moving forward because that's what survivors did. They survived. They fought. They created meaning from tragedy. And in the smallest room that became the foundation for bringing down an empire, 3 symbols remained. A wooden key that said home, a rental receipt that said hope, and a paper crane folded from Triumph that said truth matters. Those 3 things, home, hope, and truth, turned out to be enough to change the world.